Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, it's days like today that I don't know how we do a podcast. I don't know how we talk about anything at all today, when we just had an amazing Chargers-Raiders game last night. That's like all I want to talk about.
Yeah, no, they're, dead days, like the day that we're recording, which is a Monday.
Black Monday. Yeah.
Yeah, Black Monday. Well, let's not make it racial, James.
Really? Like that's where we're starting?
This is the easiest joke I have to. Yeah, it's nice to have some of these national level NFL events when things are kind of such duds locally speaking in terms of news. So great game, the Raiders Chargers game. It was, as far as I can tell, genuinely contested up to the very end. It feels like both teams were actually playing to win, which makes it all the more amazing that we ended up with a last second play to clean things up, to really bring us to the end of the game. It was almost a tie, which was, of course, a dream scenario for sickos like me on the internet who wanted a tie because of the strange circumstances of a tie setting both teams, a loss eliminating a team, and also a tie eliminating the Pittsburgh Steelers, which that's the perfect story. I can't think of like a better... I would love to send Big Ben home because of a tie. That's hilarious. And so the fact that that was on the table and that it was being actualized in this strange world, like the only thing that would make it better is no one realizing that a tie would do this until like the fourth quarter of the game. And then the announcers realizing and like letting the rest of the audience know, which is how it would play out in a movie, which Collinsworth had a couple of jokes about how you could not script this game in a movie, which fair enough. They went 6 or 7 on fourth down. And it was like a bunch of 4th and 9 and stuff like that. Justin Herbert's one of his best games in a short career full of great games. Phenomenal game. After kind of reviewing the analytics, going over the tape of the numbers, I gotta say, Brandon Staley, I was mad at the moment. I think a little bit more of a thorough analysis tells us that maybe Brandon Staley wasn't in the wrong for calling the timeout, but I was mad. I was mad because after the timeout, a thing happened that prevented a tie, and so it's the timeout's fault. That's what causality is, and that's how causation works. And so with the timeout being called and Daniel Carlson, who would have picked it, just an amazing time to miss a kick. Like, that would have been
the fact that,
so
that Al Michaels repeatedly said that he hadn't missed a kick in that building yet.
I think Al Michaels knew what he was doing when he said that. I think he knew, and that I think is what rubbed the shine off the Jinx, is the problem. Like, I think if Al Michaels didn't know what he was doing, because announcers are now a little bit too aware of the announcer's curse. That's the issue.
Well, and Al Michaels has been doing this for a number of years too. Yeah. So like he's very aware of his place in time as far as you know, I say YouTube clips, but as far as like clips of great sports moments or moments in sport, you know, from time immemorial. Speaking of which, if you people haven't had a chance to read his autobiography, it is fantastic. That is a page turner and a half. That is such a great book. I cannot recommend that enough. All right, well, I suppose we're gonna have to get into this. So let's strap in, because there's a whole bunch of Vikings news that came out today, and we're gonna break it all down. So before we start, I want to thank you guys all for listening to Norse Code. We have the off season ahead of us. The Vikings did not make the playoffs, obviously, and so we are going to be going back down to about one episode a week for a little bit, and probably one episode every 2 weeks when major news happens, like the hiring of a coach or the hiring of a GM. That will likely initiate an emergency pod and all of that, but we are going to be slowing down the episodes now that we are out of the regular season, just as a heads up. If you would like to support the show, if you'd like to help us remain ad-free, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go over to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there for $3.50 a month. You get access to bonus episodes, and you get access to other random cool stuff. I actually just posted on Patreon, and I believe I sent you a link too, part of the second episode Norse Code ever put out. And,
yeah, you sent it to me, and you said something along the lines of how long before you tap out, and I clicked on it, and I heard the old intro, which, by the way, rules. I'm glad, like, both of the intros that we've had for the show, amazing. And then I heard my voice, and I was like, I'm not feeling this. and then I clicked partway through the episode, and I heard Dusty's voice, and I was like, oh, wow, it's been a while. And I was like, I remember Dusty sounding better than this. This is weird. And I realized it was the equipment. I was out after like 30 seconds total of the show.
So we just put up the second episode we ever did. It's a clip of it. For some reason, I don't have the entirety of it. When we switched podcast providers, or rather when we first started the show, we were based in a series of SoundCloud accounts that have since been
multiple SoundCloud accounts.
Yeah, of various means and whatever. So that was all trying to like remain free for streaming, and,
right,
but yet be able to be available. So I ended up putting up just a quick episode of that. So if you're interested, check that out over at Patreon. But otherwise, we put up a bunch of cool stuff over there. Also, you can go over to paypal.me/NorseCode as well and help donate to the show there, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and buy something over there. We don't make a lot of money over at Threadless. They just send us a couple of bucks per thing, and we appreciate anybody who goes over and picks up a baby onesie or a shirt or a cup or anything like that. So appreciate all of that. Let's get into it. The Viking season is over, and right away this morning, about 8:05, 8:10, the news came out. Not only was Mike Zimmer going to be fired, but Rick Spielman, which caught a lot of people by surprise due to the report that had come out this weekend about how Rick Spielman was likely going to end up being elevated, removed from the GM position, but elevated in a everyone refers to this as the John Elway position.
Right. Yeah. Which I guess that was on the table for Ryan Pace, and he didn't get that either. It was kind of interesting because I remember talking about this, I want to say like 2 weeks ago, and I said, hey, I don't know if this is actually going to happen. My feeling is that he's going to be fired alongside Mike Zimmer, but there are multiple rumors and then multiple reports that actually Spielman would be elevated. And of course, he's very close to the Will family, so that could be just kind of a way to keep him in the building while they continue to lean on him for stuff like a coaching search and a GM search and so on. That the fact that he was fired ended up kind of spinning it back around to being a surprise when initially that was the expectation. Charles Robinson ended up reporting that actually that was the plan multiple weeks ago, and that's according to multiple sources from Robinson, which I believe because that's also the reporting that Chad Graff did and the reporting that at least somebody else did, and then also Ben Gessing reported today, which again today's Monday, that Spielman was blindsided by being fired. And, some people saw that tweet and were like, man, what reality is Spielman living in? Of course he was going to be gone. But that wasn't really the reason. Like the expectation was that Spielman would be elevated, which is why he was elevated is such a weird word because he'd have less control over the organization. But, paychecks, right? But the expectation was that he'd be moved to a different position, not that he was fired. And then Robinson said something along the lines of Spielman got caught in fallout, Zimmer-related fallout in the last couple of weeks. So I don't know what happened there, but certainly that's surprising. And that means that the Wolves won't have the ability to lean on Spielman when they find kind of a new general manager. And it's kind of interesting because we're now at a point where it really feels like the preferred candidates for the Vikings they kind of missed the boat on by a year or two, right? Because they really wanted Stefanski as their head coach, and they decided to reaffirm their commitment to Mike Zimmer. And they, I don't know that they anointed George Payton or anything like that to be the next general manager or anything like that, because it kind of presupposes that, Spielman would be gone, which I don't think is is anybody's expectation. Otherwise, they would have just fired him there and then hired George Paton. But, it would have been nice to have him in the building to promote him up. So that was kind of the issue. Like, that was kind of the missed opportunity there that I'm sure that they're, frustrated by. But yeah, the firing of Spielman makes it sound like the title, right? The firing of Spielman, I think, caught a lot of people by surprise because of how the narrative for him shifted so much by so many people who do genuinely really good reporting on this sort of thing. So, that didn't happen. Something might have happened in the last couple of weeks or even in the last week where that made it impossible for Spielman to do that. Or, maybe Spielman was offered that and he turned it down or something along those lines. So, when we asked Mark Wilf, the co-owner and president of the Vikings, kind of a roundabout way about this, he was kind of non-committal. He was just like, hey, we kind of agreed that it was time to go in a different direction, that kind of normal, I regrettably fired a friend speech sort of thing without, trying to get into the news, the exact opposite of a McCaskey, as it were. So the Bears are so funny right now. I can't not reference them.
It's so hard not to. It's so right. Hard. Just as a quick aside, last year the Bears put out a presser that was so embarrassingly bad that the writing about it was almost at like Pulitzer level. Like, it was so good that the writing about how much they hated the team and how badly that presser had gone was so beautiful. But the thing was, you could interchange the word Vikings in for Bears for like 80% of that thing, and it was still good, and it still like was relevant. I looked over some of the stuff from today. That is all Bears. Like,
it's so Bears. Well, so I retweeted a piece from the Chicago Tribune by Brad Biggs of Olin Kreutz responding to what George McCaskey said about Olin Kreutz. So for people who are unfamiliar, Olin Kreutz, multiple-time Pro Bowler, a legend within the Bears organization and among Bears fans, phenomenal center, was, after he retired, was essentially offered a job to kind of consult only during kind of player hours. So to come in during training camp and help the players out. And that job was for $15 an hour, which, Kreutz was insulted by it. And so he just decided not to do it. And this came out a couple of years later, quite a bit later, that this was what he was offered. Now, my opinion of that is that there was some misunderstanding at play. And that the Bears did a very poor job of communicating kind of what they were asking of him, and that this was kind of a normal offer or whatever. But they also did a poor job of themselves evaluating the situation. When you kind of offer a job like that, you don't offer what is being proposed as the new minimum wage, right? Like, this is the federal minimum wage standard that people are proposing, and that's what he's being offered. And if he wanted to make money off of his name, he would do kind of just a lot more than that. And coaches typically get paid quite little relative to at entry-level positions relative to others. But, you could very easily make the argument that he earned much more consideration than that. Anyway, so he shares the story, and they ask George McCaskey about this, and McCaskey says, well, I would take what Olin says with a grain of salt. And then they give him here's the thing. They give him the opportunity to walk back what he said or to paper over what he said or whatever, but instead he doubles down, right? So instead of just running with the quote that McCaskey put out there and saying, wow, I can't believe he insulted Olin Kreutz like that, they were like, hey, are you sure you wanted to say that? What do you mean? Are you calling him a liar? Because that's what it sounds like. I'm telling you right now that that's going to be the headline unless you kind of correct yourself. So I'm giving you this opportunity. And he was like, yeah, he doesn't tell the whole story. I know Olin Kreutz, that guy. He doesn't tell the whole story. And you're like, what the hell? And so Olin Kreutz responded, and multiple people within the Bears organization have confirmed Olin Kreutz's accounting of the story. And so it's a really good story by Brad Biggs. We'll include it in the show notes just because it's so interesting.
Be like the Vikings being like, no, Greg Coleman's full of crap. What?
Right, yeah. Like, what? Like, even if
Ziggy, are you sure that's what you meant to say? Oh, no, totally. I wouldn't believe a thing he said unless his tongue was notarized.
Like, right, what? Yeah, right, yeah, exactly. Like, what are you doing? We like this guy. What are you doing? So like, yeah, we'll link the whole Brad Big story there. It's great. But yeah, just wild, right? Because Kreutz is so well respected, and there are multiple people who this isn't even anonymous sourcing. The offensive line coach who offered him the job confirmed it by attaching his name to it. He was like, "Yes, this is what we offered," right? And like you can say, hey, this organization doesn't want to create a tiered system in their coaches, and they want to offer the same to all their coaches, and this is just kind of what you do. And I think it's a terrible practice, generally speaking, to like intentionally underpay people in order to get them to show their commitment to your organization or whatever. But like that, if that's their ethos, they could just say that's their ethos, right? And they could just say this is universal, whatever. They could just say that, right? McCaskey could just say, yes, we did offer him $15 an hour, and this is kind of a test of whether or not he really wants to do it, because coaching is a grind. They put in more hours than players do. And and so we want, again, I think that that's bad, but at least it like doesn't insult Olin Kreutz. They just be like, hey, Kreutz decided that wasn't worth his time, and that's his decision to make, and we respect him for it. Fine. But no, he was just like, yeah, that dude's a liar. And Kreutz was like, this guy wouldn't even know. This is not like an assistant to an assistant coach is not the type of hiring that gets flown up the flagpole to the billionaire running the company, right? Like, that's wild.
It's so good. But as the Vikings luckily are not going that crazy, but
yet,
yeah, there's still time.
There's still potentially a brewing controversy about the Spielman thing, which is why it's interesting. Like if there's a reveal or a tell-all, like if Mark Craig gets Mike Zimmer to open up to him, right? Because Craig and sometimes Brian Murphy do a pretty good job of getting Mike Zimmer to talk, off the record and then on the record about some stuff. If we can learn something about what's happened with the Spielman thing, there could be a story there that is like potentially spicy, right? And worth investigating and worth going into. But for now, we don't have an owner calling a revered player within the organization a liar, and then immediately within hours it getting like the word for word story of what the players say getting confirmed is true. So the Vikings are not quite at that disaster level yet, but there is a potential, and I'm not saying that this potential is going to play out, but there's a potential undercurrent of a storm, right? That could be brewing in that regard. And obviously the Vikings want to clamp down on it, because if they're attempting to hire the best possible people to run their organization, they don't want to make it seem like the organization is like poisoned from the inside. Like nobody wants to be at Washington Light, right? So that's something to keep in mind, is that A, it's the Vikings, anything can happen, and B, hey, we've seen the seeds of this, that something could happen. Maybe it's nothing. Like maybe Spielman was like, look, I just kind of want to watch my son play football. I'm not that, it's, if I'm not going to be the general manager here, I don't want to come into work every day. And if I'm not going to come into work every day, I don't want to steal money from you. So I'm good, right? If that's just it, if that's it, fine. Right. So it could very well be as benign as that, but it could not be. And so there's the potential of some disaster kind of looming here.
That's not foreboding at all. I love it. There's a lot of stuff to break down here. The first thing that I want to do is talk about Mike Zimmer. 8 years, some good, some bad, some really questionable decisions here and there. And it's hard to look back on the Zimmer era without looking at the stat that shows like the overall defensive level, like the overall like ranked defense for them, and how it was terrible right before Zimmer got in. He was able to correct the ship, and then it slowly started to drop.
Yeah. I remember putting together a DVOA chart, like I think back in like 2016 or 2017, when I was talking about the job that Zimmer had done. And the Vikings defense, I want to say, was around like 28th, right? It was bad. It wasn't like 13th. It wasn't like 15th or whatever. It was like 28th or something, maybe 25th, but I think it was like 28th in DVOA, or another associated defensive metric. And when Zimmer arrived in 2014, immediately jumped to league average in 2014. And they didn't add that many players, right? They added Anthony Barr, who I think started within 4 games of arriving, despite not being able to go to rookie minicamp because of the quarter system at UCLA. Xavier Rhodes got better, but it was primarily a very similar defense, right? And it immediately jumped up in quality, despite having like lost Jared Allen like a couple years prior, right? So that was notable. But then in 2016, the defense jumped up to like seventh or sixth or something, and then or 2015, and then in 2016, 2017, 2018. It was a top three unit. In 2017, I believe it was number one in points allowed, number two in DVOA, number two in EPA, number one in a couple of these other defensive metrics like yards per play. And so it was like them and the Jacksonville Jaguars, right? And in 2018, they were a top three team on defense. In 2019, they fell off to seventh. Like it was, or even it was seventh in EPA per play. It might have been sixth in DVOA or something along those lines. Like it was just outside of the top five. So the slump in 2019 was, oh no, you're not a top five defense. You're just outside of the top five, right? And then 2020, it fell all the way to like 28th in EPA per play. And 2021, it rose back up to 12th or something like that. I think they finished the year 12th when you include the Bears game. But it didn't feel like that, right? And what's interesting is I was on the Football Outsiders live cast right before, I want to say it was the Rams game. And, they asked me about kind of the defense and the team overall. And I thought that, the team was super inconsistent, right? And they were like, yeah, that's really interesting because that's the vibe, right? But you take a look at the numbers, and Football Outsiders has them as the least variant or most consistent, is another way to put it, most consistent team in the NFL. Number one in their variance metric, which measures it from like least is number one and most is number 32. And I was like, that's crazy. I can kind of get it because of how close all their games are, but from play to play or moment to moment, they're more inconsistent than I remember Vikings defense being. And so that's kind of what the 12th overall defensive ranking is about, right? It's 12th in aggregate, but in terms of like what they do, like the first 10 minutes of the game, they're probably a top five defense. And then the last 2 minutes of the first quarter, they're not just the worst defense in the NFL in 2021. They're the worst defense in NFL history as far as we can tell, going back to when you can measure 2-minute plays in the final moments of the first half, right? Like the worst by a significant margin, right? And so it was pretty inconsistent from moment to moment. And so it definitely didn't feel like the 12th best defense, which is just to say it didn't feel like an above average defense. It felt like a defense where maybe anything could happen. Maybe Eric Kendricks reels off a one-handed pick and changes kind of the flow of the game, right? I don't want to use the word momentum because we've railed against the concept of momentum in the past. And, there's something to be said about that. But like it very much feels like the game changes after moments like that, right? Whether or not it's true, certainly a big pick from Eric Kendricks or, a game-changing sack from Anthony Barr or whatever, right? That can happen just as easily as giving up a 50-yard touchdown or a 75-yard touchdown to Marquez Valdes-Scantling in one play, right? And so, that is not the character of the defenses that we saw in 2019, 2018. And what's really cool is that the 2016 defense, which of course occurred during a season where they went undefeated at the beginning and then dropped out, was the highest scoring defense themselves. And what's crazy is that the defense got better, even though that is kind of a prime signal for regression, right? That they wouldn't do that. So the defense fell off dramatically under Zimmer over the past 2 years, in large part because the Vikings also happened to avoid one of the other problems of regression, which is player turnover, until 2020. And then they had to start, I want to say, 7 or 8 new players on that defense. Like if you think of the starting defense as 12 players, the third linebacker and the nickel being the 11th and the 12th, then I think it was something like 7 or 8. That was new, right? Because the defensive turnover over that span was like 1 or 2 players, right? It was like you replace Andrew Sandea with Anthony Harris, you replace like Terrence Newman with Mackenzie Alexander. Like that's the change, and then the rest of the defense is the same, and you perpetually have Eric Kendricks and Anthony Barr, right? And then in 2020, you don't have Anthony Barr after like the second play of the second game or something like that, right? Like he was out early. You don't have Danielle Hunter. You don't have Michael Pierce, who you signed to replace Linval Joseph. All that happens, right? All of the injury luck finally goes another way, and the turnover finally goes another way. And the Vikings have to repeat that level of turnover to dig themselves out of the hole they found themselves in 2020. They signed a bunch of new players to get around it, and the defense absolutely gets better, but it didn't get better enough. And so I think that's kind of the direction that like the defensive guru team went.
Here's how I can sum up the Mike Zimmer era on defense. The run up into the NFC Championship game, and I believe even the year before and maybe even the year after, there was a third down defense that existed on this squad that you did not win against. The percentage you had to actually make it on third and short was extraordinarily small. You know what happened this year? I don't remember a year where the Vikings were run on more on third and fourth down. I do not remember a time. This is no longer a defense that could terrify anyone. The Lions looked at a fourth down against a Zimmer defense and went, yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, the only team that couldn't do any fourth downs in either game they played was the Bears. And then every other team that played fourth down against the Vikings felt like they succeeded like 90% of the time. Like, I don't know what the actual numbers are.
They could be deep in their own end zone. And they
just be like, 4th and 3 from our own 20? Yeah, we'll go for that.
Yeah, the sheet says you do that against this defense.
Right. And like the Vikings' third down defense, I haven't looked into the 2021 numbers, but the Vikings' third down defense, I believe, was actually like fine. In 2020, it was like fine. Like the red zone defense and the third down defense are both fine in 2020, but it was like the 28th best defense because they got destroyed on like first down. But 2021, it really feels like there was nothing, right? That like it had all left. Like the red zone defense, that is another, signal for regression, that had melted away. The third down defense didn't feel like it was anything. And then teams were just becoming more aggressive on fourth down. And the Vikings, for whatever reason, just don't have fourth down answers, despite the fact that they're so good on third down. And you feel like, hey, these aren't 1-to-1, but those situations map on pretty cleanly to each other. So what's going on here? Like the kind of the high leverage situations for the Vikings defense, that was an area where, they weren't amazing at outside of third down and red zone, but like, end of game, they weren't necessarily amazing, but they were really good compared to, most of the NFL. And now the high leverage situations for the defense, they just fell apart. Like knowing that they were great in the first 10 minutes of the game and, they were forcing these punts and, these field goal tries and stuff like that. Knowing that, really, it felt like it gave you nothing heading into the final moment of the first half and coming out. And this is particularly true of the first half of the season, coming out of the half too, at the beginning of the third quarter. I mean, they were just awful at the beginning of the third quarter for a good chunk of the year too. And so the defense was great for the first 28 minutes of the game or something like that. And then they were out for the next 4 minutes. And then they were pretty good for the next like 20 minutes. And then they were out for the final 6. Like that, it was just nuts watching that defense. And a big part of it, I think, was the fact that they didn't look nearly as effective on third down. Improved a lot once Anthony Barr got back into the lineup, but like it shouldn't be that contingent upon one player. And just couldn't do anything unless it was the Bears. Couldn't do anything on fourth down.
Announcers who called Vikings games loved to talk about how good this defense used to be. Used to be, not currently is, but how good that used to be and all the talent that existed, that still exists on this squad. And I feel like that's telling. Like it's too bad. Yeah.
Yeah. And it hurts a little bit knowing what Xavier Rhodes did in his 2020 season with the Colts. Obviously, with Trey Waynes being injured 2 consecutive years, you don't really get that. But, knowing what we saw from Mackenzie Alexander, I mean, his best moments with the Vikings weren't like Xavier Rhodes' best moments, right? Like he was never a world-beating corner, but he was like an above-average nickel corner, and he wasn't able to do that this year. It just kind of like sucks knowing that like, hey, this is the stuff that used to be good about the Vikings defense. Some of that was still potentially attainable, and you didn't do it, right? And, I think a lot of it, and I'm writing about this right now about kind of what happened in the Mike Zimmer defense, a lot of it has to do with kind of the entire kind of 2018 offseason kind of sets it up. And it's followed up by the 2019 and 2020 off seasons. But like, if Mike Hughes works out, right, I think we've got a different tenor of what the 2020 season looks like, a different tenor of what the 2021 season looks like. If Jeff Gladney wasn't like an alleged awful human being, like he wasn't like killing it, right? But maybe we have a different understanding of what those seasons like. Maybe they never signed Bashad Breeland, right? And so, like those are, I guess they signed Bashad Breeland before the Jeff Gladney allegations came out. But if you'd had a little bit more to work with in the cornerback room, things would have changed, right? If Danielle Hunter doesn't have back-to-back injuries, right? Like things change. So it felt attainable, but it also felt like attainability was just kind of a thing you were thinking about because you knew that was like a utopian ideal. It was like a myth, right? Like you didn't genuinely think it was attainable, but you could see how it was attainable. And so you're comparing, the past to the ideal present to the actual present. And that hurts so much more than just comparing things to the past.
When I think back over the history of Norse code, I can think of a few moments in particular where there was like real joy on the recording. And, there's happiness after a win. There's frustration after a loss. There's laughter. There's all of these like wide-ranging emotions. But the purest joy that was experienced on this show involved a couple of different moments. You can bring out the episode immediately after the Minneapolis Miracle. That pure joy. There is the episode where, oddly enough, another playoff victory over the Saints, the alleged push off for Kyle Rudolph, because at that point the Vikings were just playing with house money. It was fun.
Yeah.
But the two moments in particular I'm talking about are the hiring of Mike Zimmer. We were all very, very excited for that, and the drafting of Teddy Bridgewater. And there are two events that are you cannot break them. Those two things happened very closely to each other, and the Teddy Bridgewater news just saying it may have sank Zimmer indirectly, or like kind of began it, but between that and the Kirk Cousins, like these are two quarterbacks that are inexplicably tied to you, whether you want it to or not.
Yeah. The Teddy Bridgewater injury is like another. Obviously, it's a quarterback injury is like momentous, right? But it represents a potential, you could say, turning point, right, for the organization, and not just for the obvious reasons that you don't have your quarterback, but I think it kind of snapped Zimmer a little bit. Like just as a person, he was significantly less enthused about kind of everything happening around him, right? Like that felt like it was really big, but then also it set off like a series of events, right? Like, because if you lose your quarterback to start the season, you could choose to just punt on the season, use it as an opportunity to get better in a lot of ways, either through the draft by losing or by playing a bunch of young players and developing them. And maybe you can see kind of the backups they have in the roster, a quarterback that could be good, right? Or you could do what the Vikings did and panic. And what's crazy is that at first, the Sam Bradford trade didn't look as bad as I thought it was. In fact, it looked good. I shouldn't even say it didn't look as bad. It looked good. Bradford was playing out of his mind. You had the Sean Hill game to start the season. Fine, whatever. Bradford doesn't know the playbook. And then a week later, he does, right? And which is why they should have waited on Josh Freeman, by the way, back in 2013. Just wait 1 week. But the Sam Bradford trade initially looked really good, right? And I think that most people were aware, like, hey, Bradford is injury prone. This could change at any moment. But it looked good, right? But that meant that they didn't have a pick in the 2017 draft, which, maybe they could have used to grab Deshaun Watson, right? I think he was in the 2017 draft. Right? Because 2018, following that, was like Josh Allen and Baker Mayfield and Lamar Jackson, probably Josh Rosen, right? The 2017 draft had I want to say Mitchell Trubisky and Deshaun Watson and some guy named Patrick Mahomes, right? He was in the 2017 draft. That
I
dude.
vaguely recall
Right.
that name being important some way.
Yeah, yeah. I think mostly because of the connection of the twins. I think, um, but they could have had Deshaun Watson, which obviously today wouldn't have worked out, but at the time would have led to a couple of good years for the Vikings, or they could have had the son of Patrick Mahomes Senior, right? Like that would have been a fun. He played for the Twins, and maybe this guy works out a quarterback. I don't know, but that's the pick that they traded. And you can't track kind of where the Eagles picked with that, right? Because if the Vikings don't have Sam Bradford, they don't like pick where they pick, right? They pick much later, or much earlier, I should say, right? Because in theory, they're losing a bunch of these games. Which Taylor Heineke was on IR that season, I want to say, right? Because he put his leg through a door.
Yep.
Which is one of the reasons that they traded for Sam Bradford. A bunch of weird, crazy moments. But like the Teddy Bridgewater injury broke Zimmer and then also created the impossible 2017 to 2018 offseason scenario where he has to decide between a quarterback that might never walk again, which both refers to Sam Bradford and Teddy Bridgewater, or Case Keenum, who has a good set of brass ones, and that's kind of it, right?
The year that Case Keenum had, I still maintain there's no way that he should ever have to pay for a drink in this town. Like,
oh yeah, absolutely not. And I don't think he has to.
No.
Yeah.
Do you know who I am? Oh my God. Yeah. Oh, okay. You're good. Just
right.
Whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like you have to decide between these because what you saw out of Keenum was not sustainable, right? That you love Teddy, but also he might never walk again. That you got a lot out of Sam Bradford, but the one time his knee felt okay, you put him in for, I think it was the Chicago Bears game, and then his knee swelled up, and you're like, yeah, I guess this isn't happening.
And then somehow the Cardinals looked at that and went, we need to pay that man $20 million.
I don't think they ended up paying out $20 million, though. I think the contract number was $20 million, but in the contract, it's something like every week that you're not like starting or on the active roster or something like that, because I think he was quarterback 3. You don't get this money, right? So I think he signed a contract that was basically like, look, there is nothing guaranteed for injury, and you basically have to be playing to earn any money. And he was like, yeah, okay, I'll sign up for that. What else am I going to get? So in fairness to the Cardinals, I think that there was some element to that. They were just like, who knows, right? Maybe his knee doesn't blow up, and that didn't happen.
Well, if we're being fair to the Cardinals, we also have to say you signed Sam Bradford to this deal. It was like $2 million it was 2 year, $40 million on paper, and within a couple of weeks, you had the number 1 pick in the draft. And you picked up Rosen. So like,
yeah, you're right. Yeah.
If we're being fair to the Cardinals, I don't like to throw stats out like that's dumb things were happening all around.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. But yeah, so the Vikings are faced with this impossible decision, one that is like emotionally taxing to Zimmer because he thought of Teddy Bridgewater as like a son, right? And who didn't, right? Everyone loves Teddy. But they were like, hey, this guy might never walk again. And also like, what would we really be betting on? Like the season he was about to have? Because the seasons that he had, that's not enough to make this bet with a team this good, right? This team is too good to make a bet on a 2015 Teddy Bridgewater. The guy that we thought we were getting, the guy that showed up in the Chargers preseason game, the guy that showed up in training camp, that guy was pretty good, but that's a risk, and I don't know that we'll get that guy. So he makes this heart-wrenching decision to get Kirk Cousins. And in the presser, like Zimmer looks happy, right? He looks so happy that he got Kirk. So at some level, it's not that he didn't want Kirk and Spielman forced Kirk on him or anything like that. But it kind of resolved this problem. And then seeing kind of how that plays out, like, I'm glad Zimmer found a girlfriend because, like, nothing else has been going right in his life.
Chad Graff had an excellent piece come out today on the tenure of Zimmer, and I highly suggest that you check that out. It really is well researched, well done, a lot of good information in there, and they talk a lot about the decision to bring in Cousins and how this eventually led to the downfall of both Spielman and Zimmer.
Yeah, it's a really good piece. They don't need to go into all the details of the piece because Chad does such a good job. I recommend it over at theathletic.com. But yeah, that was, and again, all set in motion by the Teddy Bridgewater injury, right? But yeah, that was kind of the second part, like of a two-part book, right? That's the second part of the Vikings with Zimmer, because the Vikings with Zimmer before that moment are a team that is constantly overperforming, right? A team that should not be as good as it is, doing crazy stuff. Zimmer ending up as a 600 coach with 5 different quarterbacks or something like that, 4 different quarterbacks at that point. And just pulling some stuff out, right? Having the highest scoring defense as a scoring defense in 2016, and then having the best scoring defense as a score prevention defense in 2017. Just killing it again and again, overperforming and just showing up in the playoffs and showing up against Green Bay in particular. And then after the Cousins signing, they never got to pair that defense with the offense they envisioned, right? Because in 2018, it's John DeFilippo, and that was when the Vikings kind of went out of their established patterns, I want to say, and just tried to find the hot new thing, right? They wanted their own McVay. They wanted their own Kyle Shanahan, right? They wanted, the next hot coordinator, and they thought it was John DeFilippo, who was both the quarterbacks coach for the Eagles and the red zone coordinator for the team that beat the Vikings. And so they wanted that. And I think part of that might be motivated by Zimmer kind of wanting to know how his defense got solved. But, they hired the hot new coordinator, and that was a bad offense, despite having Kirk Cousins and a really good Adam Thielen and a really good Stephon Diggs. They couldn't, and a very functional, Kyle Rudolph, right? They couldn't get that offense going. And so I think it was like in EPA was like 27th, and that defense was like 5th or 6th in EPA. Like, it was a good defense. So they couldn't pair it. And then the final year of a good Vikings defense is 2019. And that's the only year that they ever paired a good offense with a good defense, because then the offense stabilizes and the defense falls off. And so, and a big part of that has to do with cap space, and that has to do with Cousins and so on and so forth. But it also has to do with bad bets, right? Like, it's not just Cousins, right? That plays a big role, but also bad bets, bad first round picks, bad signings in free agency, not being able to make good on some of the other stuff that you're doing in free agency. There were just a couple of good free agent signings. Michael Pierce obviously turned out this year to be a good signing, but you didn't get him in 2020 because of an opt-out. Sheldon Richardson was a good signing. But, you signed Tom Johnson, and he kind of underperforms in 2018 a little bit compared to how he was previously with the Vikings, right? You signed Terrence Newman in 2018 again to a 1-year contract after he had done so much for the organization for the previous 3 or 4 years, 3 years, I think, and you signed him in 2018 for a 1-year contract, and they're like, hey, and he was like, hey, if I stay on the roster, the Vikings could cut Holton Hill and Chris Boyd, right? And I don't want to take up the space for those young guys to develop. And so we've got so many good players in this roster, and Trey Waynes and Xavier Rhodes, Mackenzie Alexander and Holton Hill and Chris Boyd. And I just can't take a spot. And Marcus Sherrills needs to be here to return punts. So I just can't take a spot away. So he becomes a coach, right? And from there on out, like, it's bad bets in free agency. It's not having enough cap space to do stuff that you want. It's losing players like Linval Joseph, which Joseph is washed right now in 2021. But, it would have been nice to have him in 2020. It's finding ways to kind of lose what you need to do, right? They make a bet on DJ Wonnum, right? Because they don't invest first, second, or third. Well, they invest third round picks, but they don't invest first or second round picks in edge rushers. They trust themselves in the 4th round and the 3rd round to find edge rushers, because that's what they did with Brian Robinson. It's what they did with Ray Edwards. It's what they did with Everson Griffin. It's what they did, obviously, with Danielle Hunter. And so it's what they're going to do with DJ Wonnum. It's what they're going to do with Patrick Jones and Jarius Robinson, right? And Wonnum, currently the Vikings sack leader. Currently, I believe he's got more sacks than anyone else in his draft class. He's also bad, right? And so, the Vikings tried to get out of Wonnum by signing Everson Griffin, which is like another panic move, right? And, obviously Griffin was playing well for the Vikings. Obviously, there was a mental health crisis that, forced him off the field again in 2021. You can't really control that, but it's the Vikings not having a plan at defensive end that causes these issues to become issues for the Vikings. And again, it is probably better for Everson Griffin that he ends up signing with the Vikings, because it gives him a better support system than if not. So I don't want to say the Vikings made a bad move here, but in terms of finding ways to win, if that's the metric, if that's the goal, the Vikings are in a tough spot now. So it's probably better that they signed Everson Griffin, right? Because Griffin's probably in a better place, and that's more important. But in terms of finding ways to win and taking advantage of the window that you think you have, you're not there.
Let's put a bow on the Zimmer era. The highlight of the Zimmer era for me is always going to end up being the Minneapolis Miracle. I think for every Vikings fan, that ends up being the biggest highlight. What do you feel is the biggest? What do you feel is like the lowest moment of the Zimmer era? Is it my first thought ends up being the Teddy injury. Just as an aside, you watch certain NFL teams go through struggle and go through some weird injury, go through some weird problem. Video comes out of it. People talk about it. There's a million things that end up getting said about it. There's all of this noise about it. The thing that came out of the Teddy injury was silence.
Yeah,
a vast array of silence and no video. To this day, no video has been leaked of that injury. And this is a social media age. This is a camera's age. Things are taped nothing. The quote unquote culture that had existed started at Spielman and ended at Spielman. This was it started with Zimmer, ended with Zimmer. This was, you did not do this to Teddy. You did not do this to the team. Ignoring the Teddy injury for the moment, what do you feel like is that moment of just, this is it? This is the downfall. This is it. This is basically the lowest we can possibly go.
If we're not gonna, if it's besides the Teddy injury, I think in terms of defining it for the Vikings, like you could say one of the lowest moments was, the day they found out that Everson Griffin was going to be available for the Bills game and the Vikings came out flat and whatever, right? Like that is one of the bigger kind of disappointments of the Zimmer era, but I don't know that it kind of defines things, right? Because that team, they didn't really recover, but they made the playoffs the next year or whatever. But of a team that felt like it was kind of done. Well, the Rams game this year is a team, that's when you knew it was done, right? Like everything is dead. The team can't come out and play. Like obviously,
crowd was dead.
The crowd was dead. The team was like, okay, we have to make our own energy. Then they can't, right? Despite that kind of like being the circumstance of all of 2020, like playing in a silent stadium is not new to anyone at this point, right? Especially because the Vikings aren't playing rookies, right? And so playing in a silent stadium is whatever. So seeing people and not seeing them cheer might be something else. But like not being able to get up for a Rams game against a quarterback that like you own, right? Like that you beat pretty consistently.
And was trying constantly to give it away.
Yeah, absolutely. That I think was the end. I shouldn't say the beginning of the end, but that was the mark of the end for the Vikings. But in terms of like a low moment that kind of defines it, it's probably got to be the Danielle Hunter saga in 2020. I think, right when, and it's a slow burn, right? Unlike the Teddy injury, it's a slow burn, right? Because we're told it's a tweak. We check in a week or two later. We're told, it's nothing, and then. Hunter keeps on not showing up, or when he is at practice, he's just wearing a baseball cap, right? He's not wearing any pads. He's not even wearing a jersey, right? We have to just recognize Hunter. It's that, right? And that kind of slow trickle, eventually getting revealed that, and in fairness, this is like a fairly difficult to diagnose thing. It eventually getting revealed that he was just going to be out for the season, him chafing at that and attempting to get a second opinion partway through the season. I think he went to New York, right, to get a second opinion. Yeah. Him understanding that maybe he needs a surgery or something like that. That all playing out, and then Danielle Hunter trying to hold out and securing a better contract for himself. Like all of that playing out, I think is kind of the event or the story that places the end of the Zimmer era, I think, into its beginning stages.
And before we finish, like we had mentioned last episode that when the news finally comes out, that there is going to be the trickle out of the news. Maybe we find out more about what happened between between the offensive coordinator that just randomly quit. That was and went over to the Panthers. What was his name again? It was the Norv Turner. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we find out about Norv Turner's situation. Maybe we find out more about the DiFilippo. Maybe we find out more information about what's happening behind the scenes. And some interesting stuff came out specifically from Kendricks today.
Yeah. So I think kind of the two important things from Kendricks. One was a direct question about his relationship with Mike Zimmer, and another one was about kind of what is a good locker room culture, right? What's a good team culture? And so the question about the relationship with Zimmer, Kendricks said, I mean, he essentially was like, I don't know what my relationship with Mike Zimmer is, which is nuts, right? Because he spent 7 years with Zimmer, right? Because he was drafted in year 2 of the Zimmer era. But like he indicated that like there are some elements of our relationship, that's going to get left out. You're going to have to talk to him about it, which is like a pretty alarming response. And it echoes what Courtney Cronin said in a story that she wrote about Eric Kendricks. I want to say a couple of weeks ago. She recounts it in a podcast with Matthew Collar, which I just listened to, about Eric Kendricks kind of being uncertain about his place, right, within the organization, which again, he's been here for 7 years. If like a third year or second year player says that, you're like, okay, well, maybe you don't really understand how Mike Zimmer operates, right? And we have these stories like Terrence Newman absolutely loves Zimmer. He'll go to bat for Zimmer all the time, off the record, on the record, doesn't matter. He'll talk up Zimmer, right? He loves Zimmer, right? Anthony Barr decides to leave the Jets and come back. That says something about the culture that was built within the locker room. Maybe not Zimmer specifically, maybe, but like, Anthony Barr was not insulting, right? When we asked him about his relationship with Zimmer after the game, right? But there was that kind of moment where you're like, oh, there's like elements of the relationship that you said we'll have to talk about, right? And that's interesting. So there's that. Then he also said, what's a good locker room culture? We asked him, and he said, let's see if I can get the quote directly. He said, a good locker room culture, I think just having a voice, no matter how big your role is important, to listen up and take each other's feelings into account. I don't think a fear-based organization is the way to go. And it very
That's a hell of a quote.
Yeah, and it very much, like, it could be, right, that he's talking generally speaking, right? Like the way that is worded, he could be generally speaking. And I'll go back and I'll take a review of kind of specifically what question was asked and specifically how he worded his answer, right? But it very much, I think, is about Zimmer and the way that things were run with the Vikings. And, if one were to describe different kind of coaching styles or different leadership styles, and fear-based was one of them, I think Zimmer would hit a couple of notes in terms of coaching styles, but I think this is one of them, right? And to say to single out that kind of culture and to say that that's a bad culture to develop is, I think you're right, telling. So that, I think, is a really important element. Now, I do know that when Brian O'Neill was asked about culture, this was a general question, and I know that because I'm the one who asked this one. So I forget the specific wording of the Eric Kendricks question. It might have been about Zimmer, it might not have been. I still very much think he's talking about Zimmer. But the Brian O'Neill one, he is kind of being a little bit more general, but he did talk about collaboration, and he talked about, how important it is to get everyone involved. And he thinks, hey, it can be as little as, hey, how are you doing? When you meet each other in the hallway, and, he talks about kind of small personal things that can make a huge difference over the course of a season. Right. And so, that, is kind of, I don't know if that's as telling as the Kendricks one, but that's like, kind of maybe file that in the back of your head. Chad Graff in his piece wrote that offensive players felt often that they were ignored. So Tyler Dunn wrote a piece at his Substack, which is golongtd.com, which I think he actually also published this in Bleacher Report or something. It's very, like, I remember reading this on Bleacher Report. Tyler Dunn does write for Bleacher Report, or has written for them in the past. But he talked about the culture under Zimmer and how offensive players felt that they were ignored. So Graff at The Athletic says that offensive players felt that they were ignored. Tyler Dunn shares a couple of anecdotes about how the offense felt like that they were ignored. One of the anecdotes that he shares is about how the defense would get a list essentially of what the offensive plays were. A list is the wrong word, but like knew what the offense was going to be working on that day, and would call a defense in practice to blow up what the offense was doing, which is maybe one element, Dunn alleges, that prevented RPOs from being installed in the offense. Because if the RPOs aren't working, right, then you don't put them in the offense. But if a defense knows an RPO is coming, they're actually fairly easy to beat. And so that, there's that. Zimmer asked scheduled an offensive session that was going to have a bunch of drop back passes, and then the next day when they actually execute that offensive plan, would say, "Oh, we're a drop back team now," derisively. Like he swears. I cut out the swear word, but he's not happy about it, right? And so he would make sure that the defense would win in practices, right? And so, there's that element of locker room culture. When you look at like the Cincinnati Bengals players that went to bat for him, obviously they're going to be all defensive players because he was a defensive coordinator that he didn't form as many relationships on offense. But also, like, maybe that does say something, right? Maybe that there is something about, Zimmer preferring, defensive players and the offense feeling like they're ignored. There are elements of this reporting from Dunn that I think are not great. Like he talks about how successful the 2018 offense was until Zimmer intervened and told him to run the ball more. And then, they did run the ball in the subsequent game and they lost. And then the offensive coordinator got fired. That is, I think, not an accurate accounting of what happened in 2018. Like DeFilippo was bad. I don't think there's any, and it's not because he passed the ball a lot. So that it's a misdiagnosis on Zimmer's part as to why they were bad. But that offense was bad. So like I wrote a piece saying, hey, don't fire him, but I want to be clear. This is one of the worst offensive coordinator performances we've seen in the NFL in quite some time. Here's how I'm going to back this up. Like it was bad. So there is that. So take some of this piece maybe with a bit of a grain of salt to use that term again.
A McCaskey
yeah,
sized?
A little bit of a McCaskey. Yeah. Approach this like McCaskey would. But
no, do not do that.
Well, don't go public. Don't go in front of a camera. I'm just saying, be skeptical. But that is important, right? Is that there are elements of an organization falling apart in 2020 and in 2021 that are, I think they get characterized in different ways, like a contract dispute along the defensive linemen, an offense that feels like it's being ignored, a quarterback coach relationship that is clearly falling apart, right? There's no question about that. I'm sure they meet every week. I'm glad that they met every week for the first time ever, but it's pretty clear that they were not really getting along. And then, Zimmer's relationship with Stephon Diggs and how that was handled, and on and on and on. But like it played out different ways for different position groups and different players. But it really does feel like that there were a bunch of cracks, which are much easier to diagnose in hindsight. Like, remember at the time, a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about, aside from the Kirk Cousins Zimmer relationship, I was fairly ready to not maybe excuse, but to kind of slow roll to say maybe this isn't as big a deal as we think it is. Obviously, now that more noise is coming out, right? That it might be that there is a little bit more signal, I guess, to play on the Nate Silver book. But and some of it might just actually have just been noise, right? Like Stephon Diggs has talked about how he feels like he was immature, right, in handling that with the Vikings, right? So it's not as if, it's just, a constant parade of Zimmer screwing things up, right? Again, a bunch of players will go to bat for him. Adam Thielen, for example, went to bat for him. He said, I was here the year before he got here, and what he's done with this team and this organization, he's left it in a better place, brought a lot of great people, a lot of great men in that locker room, and a lot of great football players, and I'm thankful for those guys and all they've done, right? And that's who Thielen is, right? But also, I think that he believes that as well. And so you ask different people, you'll get different stuff. Dalvin Cook, for example, loves Zimmer. That's not going to be a shock to a lot of people. But if you don't have the buy-in of the whole team, it's going to be tough. And teams have won Super Bowls with cracks, right? I'm not saying that it's impossible, right? And every team has some cracks, but like it's tougher if you don't have the buy-in of the whole team. And we're seeing a lot more of these stories come out. And again, we might see another story come out in regards to this kind of Spielman situation.
Well, let's talk about the Spielman situation because Spielman was a part of the team for longer than Zimmer. We're talking, was it 12 years or 16 years that he's been a part of the organization?
Since 2006. So whatever that is, 16, I guess.
Yep, 16 years. And, there've been a lot of hits as far as drafting is concerned. We all marvel at how he somehow always manages to get 10 picks. Mm-hmm. and a ridiculous number of seventh rounders, and it just seemed like time, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's just kind of that row of misses in 2018, 2019, 2020, right? We don't know how the 2021 class is going to shake out. Obviously, 2020 has a big hit in Justin Jefferson, so you're not going to say that class is broken or anything like that. But the Vikings had a specific strategy approaching this season of being top heavy, one that Zimmer actually kind of disagreed with. Like, he has implied several times, like I don't want to talk about how top heavy this team is, but boy, is it top heavy. We better not get hurt. Kind of like that's what he was saying. And so if you're going to pursue a strategy where your roster construction is heavily invested up front and at the top, and doesn't have a lot of investment from a free agency perspective in depth veterans, then you've got to be hitting in these mid rounds. You've got to be hitting in even as rookies, right? So like if Wyatt Davis turns out to be an average guard for the rest of his career, he starts for the Vikings, he takes over next year, and he's average, right? He's not going to be a Hall of Famer. He's not going to go to any Pro Bowls, but you don't really feel like replacing him for about a decade, right? If he's going to be an average guard, it's still a questionable pick. Not a bad pick, but a questionable pick. Because part of the strategy that the Vikings needed to approach this offseason with is finding cheap ways to get good depth. And they did the exact opposite thing in the 2021 draft. So we don't know how good the 2021 draft is going to turn out, right? Kellen Mond could turn into a starting quality quarterback. We don't know. Chaz Surratt could end up being the long-term replacement for Anthony Barr. All of that could be true. But the way that the Vikings approached this season was it was going to be an all-in season. They had a bunch of one-year contracts. They did not extend Cousins again for the third time in order to reduce his capital, but they forced, Eric, I shouldn't say forced. Well, actually it is forced because it's a contract mechanism that Kendricks has no control over, to restructure. They restructured Anthony Barr's contract to get out from under it next year. They made a lot of moves, right, to imply that they were in this year. Patrick Peterson, 1-year deal. Xavier Woods, 1-year deal. They brought back Everson Griffin, right? Like a lot of moves. And so if you're going to do that, you need to make sure that your draft class is ready to contribute, not start, not even play a significant amount, but contribute. And if you get to the point where along your offensive line, you've got 3 injuries on the interior or whatever it is, or, you've got COVID restrictions or whatever, right? And you have to go to your third guy and that third guy is still ahead of your third round pick on the depth chart, that's a serious question. What's going on? Why haven't you attempted to approach this offseason with a way to be resilient, right? Like, I understand, like, if your quarterback goes down, you're effed. Like, you're probably not going to find another Case Keenum. Like, you would just be so lucky. But, if a guard goes down, you should not be out of it, right? Like, that's like, you should be able to find that kind of depth. Obviously, they traded a 6th round pick for Mason Cole that worked out. So there was some element there of finding depth. But for the most part, the cheap depth that you needs to come from your last 2 draft classes. And they just didn't have that. Obviously, losing Jeff Gladney, not their fault, but you invested specifically in projects. Zach Davidson is a punter playing tight end, right? Kellen Mond is not your backup quarterback. He's the backup to the backup. And honestly, if the Vikings could carry 4 quarterbacks, he would have been 4th because he lost the contest to Jake Browning. And the only reason that Browning is not on our roster is because Kellen Mond, seemingly, this is not reporting, but it seems like the only reason Kellen Mond's on the roster is because Jake Browning was not a draft pick. Kellen Mond is a 3rd round draft pick, right? And so the quarterback that you drafted in the 3rd round can't even be a backup. You're not comfortable with that. And from what we've seen, you're right not to be comfortable with it. But like, you don't have a backup quarterback for the one game that the quarterback has COVID, because it's much more likely you're going to miss one game from an important player because of these last 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So you don't have a backup quarterback that you find that you can trust, right? Like Sean Mannion's a sideline guy; he's not a quarterback. You draft a linebacker that only sees the field. I think he had 90 snaps all year, and they were all on special teams, right? Chaz Surratt. You draft a guard that you're not going to be able to get on the field. Like, the draft class was projects, right? Because the quarterback was a project, the tight end was a punter, the linebacker was a quarterback. The guard was a guard, but that one did not work out, I guess. The guard is an All-American at guard in college, but it didn't work out. And part of that, I think, is because, and I don't know that this is why Wyatt Davis isn't seeing the field, but even though Ohio State has a bunch of zone blocking in the way that they run the ball, it is very clear from Wyatt Davis's draft profile that he is not an NFL zone blocking guard. And so that's the choice they made, right? To see if they could get this guy to play outside of the system that he profiles as. Obviously, the system that he played in, but the system that he profiles as. And so they made, Janarius Robinson and Patrick Jones. Janarius Robinson got injured, but I don't think, based off of what I saw before his injury, that he was going to be taking any significant reps. Patrick Jones was ahead of him on the depth chart, and the Vikings decided that Patrick Jones wasn't very good depth at all. They only played him against teams that ran the ball a lot, right? They saw him as a run-defending defensive end that didn't have pass-rushing presence. They put him in on rundowns as a backup. How many backup defensive ends are designated run stoppers? That's what this guy was, right? So he ends up playing a bunch of snaps against, I think it was the Ravens, who obviously run the ball a lot, the 49ers. Like, those are the teams that he plays against, right? And so that was kind of the issue for this year. But whether or not Spielman was right in judging what window was available for the Vikings, and he put a lot of chips on the table in terms of, this is a win now team. I think that he was right to judge the Vikings as being in somewhat of win now mode in 2016, but that doesn't mean he was right to make the move that he did, right? I think he was right to judge the 2018 Vikings. Absolutely, of course, right to judge the 2018 Vikings as within a window, right? But Mike Zimmer hires the wrong offensive coordinator, and he, I guess, signs the wrong quarterback. Not that there were a bunch of quarterbacks in free agency to sign, but he puts his chips in on Kirk Cousins because he feels like he's forced into it, right? So there's that, right? But then he misjudges the window that they're in 2020 and trades for Yannick Ngakoue after Danielle Hunter goes down. Like, that's a bad trade, right? And he continues to make pretty poor player trades. Again, the Mason Cole trade was a pretty good one. You got to give him credit for that. But Chris Herndon was traded for a 4th-round pick. We just saw Gardner Minshew do a pretty reasonable job, and he was traded for a 6th-round pick. Like, if you put Gardner Minshew in that Packers game, I'm not sure that the Vikings win, right? I mean, the Packers destroyed the Vikings, but you've got much more of a shot than than if it's Sean Mannion, right? Gardner Minshew takes chances. He plays, volatile football. That's probably what you need against the Packers. And so the choices that they make in 2019 and 2020, the way that they build their roster, the way that they kind of approach the draft, the way that they approach team building with an understanding of who the Vikings are, it worked for a while and then it didn't. And they kept on convincing themselves that this team was ready to win, and they just weren't. Now, the team right now thinks that they're ready to win. Like we asked Mark Wilf if they were going to reload, and it's a loaded question, right? Because an owner does not want to undercut his income by telling fans not to come to games because they're going to suck for a year. But yeah, he basically said the Vikings team is about ready to win now. I'm not gonna make a coaching or a general manager hire based off of their interpretation of the roster, whether that's ready to win now. But we think that they're ready to compete. Maybe he's saying that because it's weird to tell fans not to come to games. But obviously the players will echo that because they're basically, are your friends good people? Yes, no. But it very much feels like the tenor that the Vikings think they're on, the reason that they fire Mike Zimmer is because they're ready to win. And that is kind of the dangerous lie that Rick Spielman fell for well after it stopped being true. So that, I think, is the best way to characterize the Spielman era, because he made a bunch of good signings, right? It wasn't amazing free agency, but he did make a bunch of good signings, like Linval Joseph, great signing. Mackenzie Alexander, sorry, not Mackenzie Alexander, Captain Munnerlyn, good signing, right? There was a couple of good signings. Obviously, he had a draft class for the ages of 2015. I think out of the last, I want to say 10 years, the 2015 draft is like the fifth or sixth best draft that the NFL has had. Like it's like 2011 and 2012 Seahawks, 2017 Saints, like those are above it. But the 2015 Vikings draft is frankly inspired. It was fantastic, right? And not just in terms of player evaluation, which I think he deserves some credit for, but in terms of moving around the board. I would have drafted Eric Kendricks in the first round. He was able to wait until the second. So really great value there. That's really good. But, the Danielle Hunter pick, which was very confusing, I think, for a lot of people. He had 3 sacks in college, great pick. So, like, at some points he was drafting well. He was signing some good players. Like, there were obviously busts in free agency, like basically every offensive lineman they signed outside of Riley Reef. But, there were some pretty good draft picks in there, and that luck wasn't able to kind of keep going.
I feel like this phrase kind of sums up what you had said here. If you're always in win now, you're never in win now.
Yeah, it very much seems like that, right? And organizations that kind of commit to this, it feels great, right? Like when Pete Carroll, what was his phrase? Like we're like always winning or something like that. I don't know, but the Seahawks had the same approach, right? Which led to them trading, was it 2 first-round picks for Jamal Adams? Boy. When the Legion of Boom fell apart, when the luck of their 2011 and 2012 and to some extent 2013 drafting ran out, when they stopped drafting well because I don't know why. I shouldn't say it's because they bought into their own mythos. Like who knows why they stopped drafting well. But when they stopped drafting well, that was kind of it for them, right? They couldn't quote unquote keep winning, right? And so the fact that they stumbled upon Richard Sherman in the 5th round, the fact that they nailed Earl Thomas in the 1st round, the fact that Bruce Irvin as a 1st-round pick, basically worked out for them. The fact that they implemented a new scheme, all of that, that's great, but it didn't continue. And they kept on making some really bad bets that were pretty easy to predict. Because if you take a look at, say, like the 2011 and 2012 draft, I mean, I wasn't doing the consensus board at the time, but like a lot of people loved the Russell Wilson pick. It turned out to be good. I don't know that a lot of people talk about the Richard Sherman pick as a 5th-round pick, but a lot of people loved Earl Thomas, right? Crazy good at Texas, right? So Bruce Irvin, super interesting prospect, was a nose tackle at West Virginia, ended up becoming an edge rusher. Like those drafts would probably have aligned with the consensus board, and then suddenly they started kind of buying into, and again, I don't know if this is the case, but it felt like they were buying into their own hype as drafters, and they started going off board a lot more. And if you go off board, you better hit, because it's very easy to see the mistakes you're making, right? And so they just kept doing that essentially. So a bunch of organizations think that they're constantly winning. Only one organization does that, and that's the New England Patriots. The next closest is maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Baltimore Ravens. But even they weren't doing that, right? The Baltimore Ravens had a rebuild year right when they grabbed Lamar Jackson. Really great timing, good understanding of where that roster is, and they immediately rebounded right after that because they made the right investments. They're not where they need to be, I think. Obviously, they didn't make the playoffs this year, but I think they know that, and obviously they were hit with the injury bug this year, right? The Steelers, I don't know that they're handling it as well as the Ravens did when they were in their slump, but they were probably the next closest. But the only organization that really is constantly winning is the Patriots. If you're any other organization, you should check that bias that you have, that you think that you're ready. Because even the Packers with Aaron Rodgers ended up firing a coach, right? Like even Aaron Rodgers, one of the best quarterbacks of all time, can't propel you past an understanding of your roster if you don't understand your roster well. So that's the issue, is that the Vikings thought that they could keep winning, and you just can't get that lucky in the draft year after year.
Nope, that's absolutely the case. And it sucks. And now the Vikings are without a coach. They are without a GM. Could you explain how the hiring process is expected to be done? It's not going to be an external. It sounds like it's going to be internal with a couple of voices. Is that right?
Yeah. When we asked Mark Wilf, about the process, I wanted to clarify, like, hey, so why did you choose to lead it internally instead of hiring a search firm? So I wanted him to confirm that they did not hire a search firm. Technically, he did not confirm that, but it very much seems like that they have not hired a search firm, which seems in line basically with what they do. So fine. I think search firms are bogus when it comes to finding coaches. And honestly, probably in most scenarios. But I'm not in the world of business. Maybe headhunting firms are great. But when it comes to like finding coaches, it really feels like you just search firms Google the list and then they use one of the Googled lists and bring that to the assistant director of college football or wherever, right? Or the athletic director at a college, right? So it's just like whatever. But they will be leaning on people within their organization. Wilf talked up the football operations people, talked about how smart they were. He talked about how they were going to lean on that guy. And that probably means that Rob Brzezinski is going to be pretty involved. Jamal Stevenson might lean on his contacts. He might be very involved. People on the football ops side of things might play a pretty big role in coming up with a list of candidates that Mark Wilf will interview. They will find a general manager first, and the general manager will help them lead them to a coaching search, which does establish a clear hierarchy, which I am comfortable with. I think that there should be a very clear hierarchy. And I think that most situations where the coach has more power than the GM have not worked out. Like maybe Andy Reid, but only the second time. So most of the time it doesn't work out. Like Chip Kelly, Doug Peterson, Chip Kelly again, Bill O'Brien, a bunch of situations where a coach was doing all right and then wasn't suddenly when they were able to undercut the general manager. So I'm fine with that there's a clear hierarchy, but that's how it's going to go. And the general manager will help lead the search for the head coach.
Well, there was a game this weekend that there's not a ton of reason to go, blow by blow over. We'll do a very brief overview of it. This was a game where Andy Dalton was able to carve up the defense at times, and it looked hilarious that he was able to do so. From an outsider standpoint, as a Vikings fan, it sucked. This was a Vikings team that showed up in the second half, and all of a sudden was able to score points.
And, both defensively and offensively.
Yeah. Patrick Peterson got himself a pick six. This was going to be the only year of his career that he didn't have an interception, and he got himself a pick six. Good for him. And the biggest talking point about the game ended up being at the very end when Justin Jefferson was, according to all accounts, begging for the ball in order to break Randy Moss's record, and they did not do so, and they were booed off the field.
Yeah. So officially, Justin Jefferson was never frustrated, never complained about targets. We asked a bunch of different people. They said, no, Jefferson never expressed any frustration about targets. Jefferson himself said he had never done it. I don't think that is reliable. That could be the case, right? He might never have actually been frustrated. He might never have actually demanded more targets. He might never have made known his intentions to get the record, right? Maybe. But I, am skeptical, right? I don't know that that's the case. It very much seemed like on the sideline, he was frustrated and he was looking for targets. He mentioned that any frustration was just because the team wasn't playing well, which of course that would have been up until the end of the second quarter. The sideline cameras caught him during the third quarter after the team had been playing better, still kind of looking like he was frustrated, right? And, Amir Smith-Marset says, hey, we talk a lot in the sidelines. We're joking a lot. Who knows what his body language looked like on camera? Maybe it looked like he was frustrated, but he never was. And, maybe that's the case, right? Like these things can happen with cameras, but it seems like he really wanted that record. And for a guy who wears his heart on his sleeve, it very much looks like he did a good job not feeling frustrated about it at the presser. So props to him. Maybe he was never that concerned, or maybe he wasn't as frustrated as we thought. Because I don't think that he's necessarily all that great of an actor, and he didn't act frustrated. So those are things to keep in mind. But despite that evidence that he isn't, I still think that is probably a bad move, and probably he was actually frustrated, and it probably is kind of a microcosm of the issue with Mike Zimmer, or an issue with Mike Zimmer, which is his understanding of what's important in his relationship with players. Because Mike Zimmer is right that his primary job is to get wins. And if you're in a situation where you have to choose between a even slightly higher probability of winning and getting a player a record, you should choose the one that gets you the wins, right? But there's a couple of problems here. One, I'm not going to say this win is meaningless. It very much seemed like it meant a lot to at least some of the players and certainly to Mike Zimmer. But the win is about as low stakes as you can get, right? Obviously, the win makes the organization a little bit worse from a draft pick perspective. And maybe it's important to establish that team culture. We talked about this last week. But also, like, you're competitive people. You just want to win a game that you're in. It sucks to have to throw, right? So there's that. And by throw, I mean to take a dive, not like throw the ball. So there's that. But it is as low stakes a win as you can get. And so the area where you can make an exception to that specific thing is probably this situation where a win does not meaningfully get you out of anything or meaningfully get you into the playoffs or anything like that. And if you take a very slightly lower probability of win, this is the scenario that you do it just to make sure that the player gets kind of what they need, right? To feel like they're respected in the building, right? So there's that. But then also on top of that, the Vikings are like at the end of the game, the Vikings are 2 scores up. Now, there is the possibility that if you throw the ball, the Bears will get a pick six, successfully convert an onside kick, and then successfully throw a Hail Mary to get, and I think that in that scenario, they also have to get a 2-point conversion. I don't remember. But, there is that scenario does exist. And so technically the probability of winning does decrease if you throw the ball instead of run it. So like it technically exists, but it is not like a probability that I respect, as it were, and that I wouldn't, right? Bruce Arians does this. I think that Bruce Arians is way overrated as a coach. I think he's probably a good coach, but I think that he's overrated. But the one thing that he does is that for players that he's not out on, like Antonio Brown, he gets them their records. He made sure that Mike Evans continued his 1,000-yard streak this year and last year. He made sure that Rob Gronkowski hit his incentives, right? And obviously Tom Brady plays a big role in that. He wanted Gronkowski to do it too. But, he made sure that as soon as Mike Evans got 1,000 yards, they take him out of the game. But it was very clear that that's what they were looking for, right? Coaches will do this. And there was every opportunity to get Justin Jefferson, especially because the Bears weren't like tripling him or anything like that. And there is some, I guess you could say, culpability, maybe the weird word to use there, with Kirk Cousins. The touchdown to KJ Osborne, happy for KJ Osborne. But the reasoning that Cousins walked us through on that touchdown was that there's a lot, right? Because it comes down to reading a play and making a split-second decision while you're reading a play, fine. But part of his reasoning was ultimately he thought that they would be doubling Justin Jefferson. And it turns out they were nobodying him. He was wide open, right? But they were kind of doubling KJ Osborne. So I don't know why he threw that or why he didn't get off that read, because he says primarily his decision is based off of what the safety does on a crossing route like that in the high red zone, which is fine. That's what you do. And the safety just stood still, right? He didn't cheat one way or the other. If the safety is not cheating one way or the other, wouldn't that mean it is less likely that Justin Jefferson would be doubled? So that plays a role too, right? Is that he could have gotten the record with that touchdown. But the decision to make sure that they like ran the ball and kneeled out the clock, that was wild. And the end of the game is so bizarre because when they get their final possession, they line up and they're not in victory formation. Justin Jefferson's out wide. You've got a fullback. You've got a running back. Like, they're lined up to run a play. If the only thing you want to do in that situation is to run out the clock so that you win, you absolutely take a knee. Nothing else. But they run a play, but it wasn't a passing play. It was a running play. Now, I don't know if you remember Dalvin Cook fumbling in important moments in games, but I do. If you're so concerned about the possibility of the Bears grabbing a pick six, getting the onside kick, and throwing a Hail Mary for a win, I wouldn't get Dalvin Cook the ball to run it when you could just kneel it. So I think that if you're playing with that minuscule probability, get get Jefferson the record, man. That is wild that you wouldn't do that. I wouldn't care if Jefferson was quadruple covered. I would want him to earn it then, right? Because then you can't even really dispute the record that much. Get him the ball, and if it's a pick, who cares? You're gonna win the game. So like that was wild to me that they ran a play and then the next play they went into victory formation. Like, if you're gonna run a play, just get him the record, man. The franchise record. Like that's Randy Moss. Like getting him to beat a Randy Moss record? That would mean so much for a player like him.
And yet, here we are. Another record-breaking performance cut short by a Vikings coach who decided that it wasn't important.
Yeah, and after the game, I asked, like, hey, so were you aware of Justin Jefferson, being close to getting the franchise record? And, he said he was. And this is like, inside the mind of a reporter. So this is a moment where I have to make a decision to either ask a follow-up question and ask, well, why didn't you make sure that he got it? Or to wait and see what he says. I'll admit my performance in that presser, not up to my usual standards. I've asked some pretty good questions in pressers this year. I screwed up in that presser, but not there. I nailed that moment. I decided to shut up, and he continued. And he said, I don't care about records. I care about winning games. And he said something like, you're going to have to ask him how he thinks about it. Right. But he made it very clear he did not care one bit about that record. And like, okay, man, that's kind of nuts. It's not that this is the reason that you sometimes have problems with young players. It's that the kind of approach that you have here, which leads you to this conclusion in this situation in this game, is the reason you have trouble with young players, right? It's not that you specifically wouldn't get the record in a situation where it was attainable, but it's that you're the kind of person that wouldn't, right? And it's more like, because there's no contract incentive specifically for getting a record. Usually, almost certainly there isn't. I don't know that there's been any contract that's been written that way, but so there wasn't an incentive. He wasn't playing with Justin Jefferson's money. It really is just kind of a respect thing. At this point, I think it's inarguable that Justin Jefferson is the best player on the roster, right? Like maybe Danielle Hunter, but like he's not like on the roster right now. Sorry to say, like he's played like 4 games for the Vikings in the last 2 years. It's if he's out of your brain, and he'll be back in your brain next offseason, right? But if he's out of your brain, it's inarguable, I think, that it is Justin Jefferson. So like it's a little bit respect, right? And it would have been nice to do that. So there is that. Now I did screw up that presser. It was one of the more tense pressers I've been in. I've had Zimmer yell at me a bunch of times, and I don't get like that freaked out about it. I'm always like a little bit, like no one likes to get yelled at, so I'm always like a little bit whatever. But in that presser, like I asked about how DJ Wanham did or something. There's something about like the ability of the Vikings to get sacks, and I stumbled over my words. I called them snacks. Just a poor moment by me, but the good thing about being a reporter is that it's much lower stakes. I don't get fired for simple mistakes like that. So, I'll take a look at the tape, I'll listen to it, and I'll get better.
I was going to say, speaking of going back to the tape, Leslie Frazier is apparently in the running for the Bears coaching job.
God, that's so perfect, especially because Doug Peterson's also in the running. Like, I can't imagine 2 funnier coaches to demolish the Vikings over the next decade.
Yeah.
Like that sounds so funny. And like, dude, Leslie is killing it in Buffalo right now. Like they have the number 1 defense. Like I don't know that a ton of people are talking about it. And if they are, they're probably all on the East Coast. So I tune them out, East Coast elites. But
well, that and there's no Boston accent, as we learned last episode.
That's right. Yeah, there's no Boston accent. But by EPA per play, the Buffalo Bills, I think, are number 1. If not, they're number 2. But for most of the year, they were number 1. Like that defense is good as hell. So Leslie Frazier is killing it. we've seen some coaches in their second opportunities do much better than in their first opportunities. We've seen a lot of coaches not do that, like Pat Shermer's a good example, but we've seen some, like Bill Belichick is a guy who needed a second NFL opportunity. Pete Carroll is a guy who needed a second NFL opportunity. I guess technically the Patriots are Belichick's third team.
I was
but no one
about to
counts the
say
Jets.
that might be technically a third, but he was only a Jet for like
6 hours.
yeah.
Yeah.
somehow was a Jet. I think longer than
Then Josh McDaniels was a coach of the Colts. Yeah.
Colts, yeah.
I'm glad our brain went to the same spot there.
Well, it's the Patriot way. That's
yeah, right. But yeah, so if he, and Leslie Frazier played for the Bears, so there's something there too. So Frazier becomes the coach of the Bears, and they end up continuing to field excellent defenses. And Frazier stopped running like the covers 2 stuff that everyone was criticizing him for like a decade ago, right? So like if they become a good team and just persistently torture Vikings fans, like that sounds so funny. But also Doug Peterson coming back specifically to play the Vikings twice a year instead of occasionally, but with like a lot of danger. That's also funny to me. So, yeah. Welcome back to the NFC North.
No kidding. All right, we're going to go into the mailbag, and this is a long mailbag. For the record, there's a lot of stuff in here, but we're going down to 1 episode a week here, so savor this one as much as you can. We're going to try to breeze through some of these, though. Damian Barrett starts us off. Damian Barrett, by the way, the winner of the Norse Code Hell League. Despite a 130-point kicker performance by Daniel Carlson,
that's so funny.
Damian Barrett was able to squeak by with a 40-point victory in that.
Well, in the Hell League, that is a squeak.
That is
you barely got it.
That is ridiculous. Damian Barrett starts us off and says, as Arif will attest, branding is important, and I get that being salty was Zimmer's thing. However, did his recent comments on Mond and then Jefferson's record attempt take it too far and portray somebody who just didn't enjoy the game / managing this team anymore?
I don't think that means that. Like, I don't think it means that he didn't enjoy the game anymore. I think he wanted to win, and I think he didn't think Kellen Mond was going to get him there. I think that's just genuine. And I think that so being salty is who he is, right? But I don't think he took it too far, but just by saying, like, look, I see him every day. It comes out super cold, right? And I'm sure Kellen Mond did not like seeing that played over and over again. But like, the questions were going to keep coming until he was like, I know who he is. I see him every day. I don't need to see him on the field. So there's that, right? And if you make a decision to play all your starters except also play Kellen Mond, like that doesn't make any sense either. So that's fine. The Jefferson one, I think you're closer to it. I don't know, man. I'd like you know that your time is over as a coach. And I'm saying that because of the Paul Allen interview he did, right? Like he knows his time is over. He clearly deferred questions in the presser about that, whether it was a question was directly related to whether or not he received an update about his job status, or the question was about reflecting on his time with the Vikings, which is clearly a question about his time being over, right? But he knew it, right? And so it is like a lot to, at the end of your coaching career, not give this one guy the thing. In fact, I think actually it's more dumping on Ihmir Smith-Marsette that speaks to this more than Justin Jefferson, right? Because Ihmir Smith-Marsette, great game, 103 yards, I think, something like that, and a touchdown. And Zimmer talked about how hard he's worked, but he primarily emphasized how much further he has to go and what he needs to do to be a good receiver. And so I asked, like, hey, which, by the way, this is also what I'm talking about in terms of like an average to below average presser. This is an average question. I could have done better here. But I was like, hey, so he said that, he ran a route poorly and he couldn't get open. So he went to the sideline and he asked Adam Thielen, like, hey, what should I do differently? Right? Is this what you're talking about in terms of his work ethic? And Zimmer was like, no, there's a lot he needs to do. He needs to mature. He needs to do this. He needs to do that. There's a lot he needs to do. So it's not just that. So like that, I think is more of that, right? Like Zimmer is very honest and blunt and upfront, which I'm going to miss probably. Like maybe we'll get another coach that's upfront and honest, but I'm probably going to miss it. I'm probably not going to be able to get a coach that's as upfront and honest as Zimmer was. And I might not get coordinators that are this open about kind of what they're doing. Because if you ask a football question to Andre Patterson, he will give you a football answer, which is great. I don't know if I'm going to get that. But kind of a weird moment to be like, yeah, Ihmir Smith-Marsette is not good. Like he didn't say that, but he almost said it. And so that's close, I think, is it closer to that than the Jefferson thing. The Jefferson thing is like very weird to me, but yeah.
Damian Barrett also asks, with today's changes, is the writing on the wall for Cousins, and is it likely the ownership will look to bring someone in who might be able to get more out of him? And if so, who's on the market rather, and who is that most likely to be? Also, when is the dedicated Hell League podcast, and where are you putting my statue?
Oh my God. Damian Barrett is drunk with power.
That is exactly what's happening here.
He also emailed us a PDF of Hell League stats, which I will pour over. That's who I am. I cannot change that about me. But that is a lot, Damian. And look, you're a Norse Code Hall of Famer. We can't take that away from you, except we very much can. And but you're feeling it too much. Right? Yeah. You're feeling it a little bit too much, Damian. You're feeling it a little bit too much. As for the Cousins question, I genuinely think ownership is very open-minded on this. I think that if they find a coach who they're impressed with that says that they can win with Cousins, that's the coach they're going to roll with. If they find a coach they're very impressed with that says, hey, this is going to take a year, we have to move on with Cousins, that's the coach they're going to roll with. And they're going to make a decision based off of who they hire and not make a hiring decision based off of their evaluation of Cousins. I think that that's genuine. That is what they shared. They could be lying, but I think that that is genuine. So I don't know what Cousins' future is going to be. If I were to take a guess, I would say that that's it. The Vikings will attempt to move him, but that's just a guess. It is a very this is like a 51-49, 55-45 kind of situation where I think the Vikings will try to move him.
Damian Barrett's vibe, by the way, right now is totally that guy from last year that was drinking the cranberry juice on the skateboard, like
yeah.
with the TikTok video with the Fleetwood Mac,
right, with Fleetwood Mac, yeah.
That is exactly where Damian Barrett is at. Kevin Jellerson asks, I'm probably too late to the game, but how many 7th round picks were included in Rick's severance package?
I have to imagine 3 or 4, right? Like I think my guess is what happened is that that Rick gets to keep 3 7th round picks, and then on his way out, he found a way to flip into a 4th.
Yeah, that seems fair. Lake Cavassier asks, how does one explain the abject failure play calling to get first half targets to Garrett Bradbury on Sunday?
I don't know. It's incredible. We've learned so much about Garrett Bradbury, the receiver, in these past couple of years, but especially last week. And the Vikings know that they've got a playmaking weapon right under their nose. They refuse to use it. I think that's the biggest sign that they actually gave up. Like, yeah, they came back to win against the Bears out of a double-digit deficit. They crafted I don't know if Cousins has been credited by Pro Football Reference with the fourth quarter comeback. I forget how that works with ties. But because I think they were tied heading into the fourth quarter, and then they ended up scoring twice. I could look it up right now. I won't. But so obviously the Vikings fought. But they did not truly fight, because if they were to truly fight, they would use their best weapons. And their best weapons are Justin Jefferson and Garrett Bradbury.
I liked Bradbury's quote afterwards, after the catch. He was like, "This was instinct just turned on."
Right? Yeah. There's no one around me, so I just kept running. Instinct just turned on.
Yeah, it's like, dude, that is exactly what you want out of your receiver. Like that guy's got ham potential there. Raul asks, first off, for the podcast listeners with Degrees Corner, there was a point. I love that. There was a point when I was struggling on multiple choice tests. I'd cross out the obviously wrong ones, but ultimately chose the wrong one out of the 2 remaining. So then I started choosing the one I wouldn't have chosen with success. In the search for their next leader, should the Vikings adopt this approach?
No, because I think there's no floor. I'm going to repeat that. Um, is a phrase I used on Twitter a lot recently with regards to the Mannion Cousins debate or Mannion Monge debate. There is no floor. It can always get worse. And if you decide that this guy's the worst candidate and then you roll with it, that guy was probably the worst candidate. Like how bad you can be as a head coach is limitless, right? Like Hugh Jackson is probably not the worst you can do. It's just the worst we know about, right? So I don't know if I would go that far, but I get what you're saying. If they narrow it down to 2 or 3 and then rank those candidates 1, 2, and 3 or something like that, maybe they should head with the third candidate instead of their first candidate or whatever. But I don't know. Also, I find that kind of funny about your approach to multiple choice tests. It's like the one thing I was good at. If I could have gotten a degree just through multiple choice tests, man, I would have like 4 PhDs right now. Okay, I can't imagine handing out PhDs on multiple choice tests. That sounds like a nightmare. But that's where I'd be.
I'm just imagining you you defending your doctoral thesis using multiple choice.
B, A, C, D, E, A.
Exactly.
All of the above.
Also, which playoff victory over the Saints was more detrimental to the long-term health of the franchise? Minneapolis Miracle or the Rudolph catch?
Ah, man. Okay, so the Minneapolis Miracle puts you into the Cousins race, right? It's the one that convinces you the team can win. That's the issue with the Minneapolis Miracle. So that's what sets you back there, right? Is that you end up, first of all, Cousins sees you as a more attractive team, right? Because I think he narrowed it down to the Jets, the Vikings, and the Cardinals. I think there's maybe a fourth team, but either maybe the Broncos, they either ruled him out quickly or he ruled them out quickly. And then the Cardinals weren't going to come up to 30, which was the Jets' price. The Vikings initially offered 25, and they brought it up to 28 with the Jets' offer in hand. Good negotiating by Cousins and his agent. But I don't know that he is as enamored with the Vikings without the Minneapolis Miracle, right? Because if it's a first round exit, it's a team that, I mean, they still have a really good defense, but there's something you feel differently about, say, the 2015 Broncos defense or the 2013 Seahawks defense than you do a good defense that doesn't go far. Like a good example might be what was the Super Bowl Ravens team, the 2000 Ravens, right? There was a defense about as good as that Ravens defense that year, and it was the Tennessee Titans defense. It might have even been a better defense. Probably didn't score as much if I remember correctly, but allowed fewer points. No one talks about that. So, like the Titans aren't as appealing an organization as the Ravens are coming off of that. So I think plays a role in how you perceive that defense, even if like the play that puts you in is a miracle from the offense and not from the defense, right? So yeah, like not many people will talk about these really good defenses that just did not get as far. So yeah, I think that one might be it, but the 2019 one is an interesting one because it really depends on what your opinion of the rumors surrounding Zimmer are coming off of that playoff game, which was the rumors that he'd be fired if they didn't win, right? Which the Wilfs did deny before the game started. So that is something that you have to keep in mind. But if you take it as fact that they would have fired Zimmer without the win, then the second thing that it comes down to is your opinion of Kevin Stefanski as a head coach. Now, Browns fans seem a little bit less enthused about Kevin Stefanski, but I still think that they generally think that he's a great coach, right? And certainly it looked like a great hire for the Browns at the time they finally make the playoffs for the first time in was it 2 decades? I don't know. But they did the thing. And they even won a playoff game. So it really depends on what you think of Kevin Stefanski as a coach. This year seemed a little bit weird, but of course, they had to deal with an injured Baker Mayfield, who maybe is not good. Seems to be the consensus. Again, I think that he's injured, but and also having Case Keenum play. But that I think is the next thing. The problem is Kevin Stefanski might be a great coach, but the thing that really has helped the Browns out a lot is how good that offensive line is. And I think how good that offensive line is has a lot to do with the coaching of Bill Callahan, the offensive line coach, which maybe Stefanski gets into the building after you fire Mike Zimmer. But it would not shock me if Stefanski valued the relationships that he had in the Vikings organization and maintained a lot of the same coaching staff there, which you can't do if Zimmer stays with Minnesota. I mean, I guess the Browns did bring one or two people that, like Joe Woods, right? One or two people that had worked with the Vikings, but primarily it was a new staff. I don't know that that's the case here. So that's the other thing to keep in mind. I'm going to go with the Minneapolis Miracle because it sets up the cap situation with Cousins, and it reinforces the idea of buy in and win now and stuff like that from the Vikings. But I think you could make a case for either.
Next question is from Kenneth Allen, who asks, do you agree with Eric Eager that the Vikings are the best opening for head coach and GM? He seems very confident, but I'm having trouble seeing it. I could see the Browns and Dolphins both as more desirable, and maybe even the Bears.
I could see the Bears. It depends on what the coaching candidate or the coaching community at large thinks of Justin Fields. If they think that he is a great quarterback, which, mind you, he's had maybe the worst rookie season by QBR. I mean, I think Josh Rosen was a much worse rookie, but maybe in terms of statistical production, that Justin Fields was worse. I haven't looked that up. No, he had the worst month of QBR. That was it. It wasn't the worst over a full season. But either way, if it could be dependent on what people think of Justin Fields. I think that the Broncos are a better job. One, because you've got complete freedom at quarterback as opposed to having to manufacture freedom at quarterback. But then also two, I feel like the stuff you like about the Broncos is going to be there for longer, right? Like obviously both offenses are young, both have good receivers on offense. The Vikings obviously have a better top tier receiver, but the Broncos have better depth with young receivers. Probably, again, it depends on Osborne and Amir Smith-Marset. So, but like defensively, I feel like those guys are probably going to stick around longer than the Vikings' good defensive players. Again, Danielle Hunter accepted. But like, I don't know how many more years you're going to get out of Harrison Smith. I don't know how many more years you're going to get out of, Eric Kendricks. And then after that, who does the defense even have? Like, yeah, you've got two nose tackles. Do you want to move on from one of them? Or are you going to be stuck in a defensive scheme because the two highest paid defensive tackles are both nose tackles? How are you going to figure that out? I think that there's a little bit more to work with defensively with the Broncos. So I would say that that's a better one. But the Vikings are pretty high up on the list. So the reason that Brian Flores is such an interesting coaching candidate is because the Dolphins are very bad. And so I think that that is not a situation I'd want to walk into as a coach, because then you have to do as well as Flores did or better in order to kind of look like a good hire. And that seems pretty hard to do. That offensive line is broken. It is worse than the Vikings one for sure. So like that one's not good. It looks like the Houston Texans job isn't open, even though there were rumors that David Culley was on his way out, which I'm glad. Culley deserves another shot. They should not have won a game. So good job, David Culley, for getting to 4 wins. And like taking it to the Titans in the last game, like that dude might actually just be a good coach. I did not know who the Texans head coach was until about 5 weeks into the season. But that dude, I think, can coach. Weird situation for him. But if he does end up getting fired and if he's the fall guy, it looks like Josh McDaniels will be the guy in Houston. So it doesn't really matter how good of an opening the Texans organization is. But obviously, if that is an opening, that's the bottom of the list. That's the worst organization. Then above that, it's probably Jacksonville, but at least you got Trevor Lawrence, who I think, statistically, he's playing very poorly. He is having a very poor year of production, no question. I think that Nate Tice is right when he says that Lawrence is doing so many things so well that he's really actually demonstrating the kind of potential that made him a number 1 overall pick. So I would think that most people would be very, much more than the Justin Fields situation, would be much more interested in the Jacksonville situation from a quarterback standpoint. But I just think the rest of that is just so undesirable that I would probably put the Bears above them, despite the difference between Fields and Lawrence. And then I think there's a huge gap, and I think it's the Vikings and the Broncos. I probably missed an organization or two. No, I have no idea who I missed, but I'm sure I did.
No, that was Broncos and Dolphins and all that. But we'll
Hmm.
go over to the original Fat Thor, who asks, "How do you
Is
evaluate?"
that the full name? The original Fat Thor?
That is the full name. Original Fat Thor
Congrats, dude.
asks, "How do you evaluate someone to be a GM who hasn't been a GM? Not entirely sure how that talent pool is evaluated."
I wish I could tell you the full answer, because if I knew the answer, I would be able to give you a little bit more insight into who I think are good GM candidates or not. Right? The past 2 weeks, I've been deferring on the question by saying, "Here's a list of GM candidates. I don't know. Here's the guys I'm excited by. I could be very wrong about all of them." Um, but like if you're conducting an interview, um, I think that this is a essentially a bunch of case study interviews, right? Which normally I'm against, right? Because if you're asking people to do work for you, pay them. But in this case, you need to know kind of what their vision for the organization is, and so you would ask them, how would you approach the Vikings? What would you do? Kind of what operations would you put in place? What does workflow look like in your ideal organization? Who are the types of people that you would bring in? You don't have to name any specific names, but what are the skill sets you're looking for? What are the organizational values that you'll prioritize? Because you'll be setting the tone for the football operation side of this, right? How are you going to run things on draft day? I am not really going to have any answers in mind when I'm asking these questions. I'm not looking for someone to give me the right answer in terms of what I've got in my head. I want someone who can explain their thought process in detail and, generally speaking, understand the importance of process in general. So these are things, in terms of evaluating the organization, these are things that I am not going to know, because I don't know how good like Brandon Brown, the former Eagle Scout that is being tossed around, or um, uh, Kwesi Mensah, I think is the guy from the Browns that the Vikings are potentially linked to. I don't know. I just know that they're from analytically forward organizations, and that's intriguing to me personally. I, of course, would ask questions about analytics and stuff like that, but like, you ask questions about like their ability to self-evaluate, and you don't ask, "Can you self-evaluate?" but you ask, like, "What are your biggest misses? Why did you miss?" Right? And if they can be honest about that, um, that's good. If they can be honest about that, and if they can explain, like, I missed this because I misevaluated, or I missed this because, and it's okay to say sometimes, hey, sometimes you're just going to miss in the draft. These things happen, right? But if you can get a couple of honest answers about, like, "Hey, I didn't realize the direction the league was heading in," right? If they can be honest about that, that's great. So those are the kinds of things I would look for: a vision of what the organization looks like, the things that they value, whether or not that they can critically self-evaluate. I wouldn't ask questions like, "What do you think is the most important position in football?" And I wouldn't be like, "Boost, wrongo, it's quarterback, you idiot." Right? Or I wouldn't be like, "What's the most important position on defense?" And if they don't say cornerback, I'm kicking them out. That's like, I think that that's important. But like, the thing is, if they're inclined towards process and evidence based decision making, and they feel comfortable building an analytics operation inside the organization, they'll come to that conclusion themselves if it's the right conclusion, right? If they're good at it, right? And so it's not important for me to get the right answers. It's important for me to get the right processes. And I don't know what those are going to look like until I interview like 5 or 6 GMs, right? And so that's what I want. And if a GM comes to an interview unprepared to give me a broad structure of what the Vikings organization should look like, I don't know that I want that guy, right? Because he's not prepared for an interview about the Vikings. He might be prepared for an interview about a team. How would you construct a team? And that's important. I want to know what his vision of an ideal team looks like. But I also want him to know, like, I'm not even going to have an answer on Kirk Cousins ready. Like, I might ask what they want to do about Kirk Cousins if they've studied the Vikings cap situation and whether or not they can do anything. But if they say, "I think we can win with Kirk Cousins, and here's how I would build an organization around that premise," and it's compelling, that's fine. That's not my answer, right? But I'm not gonna hire a guy to make these decisions if I've already made these decisions, right? So that's the thing. If I'm hiring a guy, I'm trusting them to make decisions. And so if a guy impresses me in every respect except he says the wrong answer on Cousins, I am asking, or I am valuing the wrong things in that interview. Because if a guy can run a good football operation and then concludes that Cousins is going to take you there, fine, I'll give him a shot. And if not, I'll give him a shot to get out of it at least once, right? So, um, that's kind of how you probably evaluate a general manager candidate. And there's nothing that we have externally as reporters that are going to give us a ton of insight into that, especially like the Vikings beat is not particularly used to having access. Like the Colts beat, for example, has a little bit more access to the way that the Colts organization is run. And I don't mean because of hard knocks or anything like that, but like Ballard has been a lot more open with the Colts media about kind of going through it than Spielman has with the Vikings media. So I don't know if we're going to be able to get any of that, but we might be so unused to it that we might not know to ask it. Right. So that's kind of it. And so I can say, hey, this guy comes from, Ed Dodds or something like that from the Colts. And he comes from an organization that's well run. He's been well respected in league circles. I can be excited by a guy like that, but I can't tell you if he's good or not.
Christopher Wiley asks, can we basically signal the symbolic end of any coaching regime by the time they stop taking accountability for a loss and start blaming their players, the refs, etc.?
I guess. I don't like, people say this about Zimmer, that he's like, it's never his fault. But like, I think they just kind of hyper focus on the parts of his quotes that talk about other elements, right? Because he will very often say it's his fault after a loss, or that's on me or something, right? And people will remember it more early in his career, I shouldn't say earlier in his career, but like earlier, like 2018 against the Rams, right? They got burned, and Zimmer was like, "Yeah, I got out coached. That's on me," right? And people remember that more. But like most pressers after a loss, you'll talk about kind of where he messed up. But that doesn't mean he's not going to be honest about what he thinks about the refs or anything. So, yeah, I think that is a fine barometer, but I don't know how much this actually applies to Zimmer, honestly. Sorry, I could have very easily pandered here, but I guess I didn't.
Tim asks, Kierkegaard, the philosopher, said that life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. Should I stop worrying whether the Vikings win or lose, who the next GM or coach will be, and just recognize that because of the Vikings, I am having an experience?
That is so, James. This is the first mailbag in a long time where I've not looked at a single question before we started. And this is a choice we made before the podcast. Like, hey, let's see how this goes. But James had asked me if I know anything about Kierkegaard, and I was like, do you mean kicker guard as in a made up position that performs both of these, or the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard? Which now I want to know about kicker guards, but I that's very Kierkegaardian. It's very kind of the true spirit of Nietzschean nihilism, and not the kind of nihilism that we think of when we say the words nihilism, but like the embrace the reality of life nihilism that is more prevalent in mid-century philosophy. Anyway, what a broken group of philosophers that was. Holy crap. Anyway, I think that if you can release yourself from the results of the Vikings as being a stake that you take in terms of how outcomes affect you, and merely experience the Vikings, you're probably psychologically much healthier.
Yeah, I'd go with that. Bill Botke asks two questions. First, I'd like to see the Vikings get a GM or senior advisor who is deeply invested in football analytics, perhaps following the model of Paul Podesta's model, or DePodesta's model, in with the Browns. Are there any obvious candidates who could fit that role?
So there are one or two candidates from the Browns themselves, right? That would fit. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is the name that I was missing there. So that's so he is basically, I think, the George Payton of the Cleveland organization. So he's somebody that would be interesting. He's the vice president of football operations there. And Darren Wolfson did link the Vikings to Kwesi Adofo-Mensah as somebody that they're interested in. Obviously, they have not conducted any interviews yet, but that is something to think about. So that's somebody from the Andrew Berry, Paul DePodesta Browns that might directly adopt a lot of those philosophies. The Bears, I think, are interviewing him or have requested to interview him. So there's that. I mentioned the Philadelphia Eagles organization as an analytics forward organization. Brandon Brown is the scout there that has gotten a bit of play. I think that there's at least one other candidate from the Eagles that ends up on a lot of these lists. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. Other than that, I don't know. I think that there is a Chiefs or Patriots director of player personnel. The Patriots are very systematic about their approach, and as much as we kind of clown the history of Patriots head coaches, which Brian Flores looked like he was going to break, but I guess not. um, the history of personnel people is actually pretty good. If you take a look at like Scott Pioli and Thomas Dimitrioff, like that's a pretty good history. We'll see what Nick Caserio does with Houston, but that is something I think to take a look at. The Colts organization is run pretty well. I wouldn't say it resembles much of what the Browns do, but it is run pretty well. So when I brought up Dodds, that would be probably not in line with the answer to the question, but it would be kind of like, are there candidates that probably have a good understanding of what organizational structure looks like?
Next question is going to be from also from Bill Botke, who asks, let's pretend Arif was hired as GM for the Vikings, which would be great fun. I like the snort of derision. If Arif could make one decision to help the 2022 Vikings, what would it be? Examples include hiring someone, making a change at drafting, football philosophy, drafting someone at 12, getting rid of someone, etc.
Yeah, I'd hire Kwesi Adofo-Mensah to do my job. That's the one decision. I sound quietly unqualified for this.
You'd elevate yourself.
Right, yeah, it would become the John Elway. Yeah, exactly. I might find a way to induct myself into the Vikings Ring of Honor, of course. Actually, if I get one decision, yeah, that's it. I'm in the Ring of Honor. No, if I don't get to wish for 1,000 wishes and just hire someone to do it, or something like that, I think the one choice that I would make is to move on from Cousins, right? And that one choice could involve two sub choices, which is to take on 12 to 15, maybe 10 to 12 million dollars in signing bonus, and then put him on the trade market. That might be two choices, but yeah, I'd attempt to move on from Cousins, and guarantee a part of his salary for this year, put him on the trade market. And if I'm getting less than a second round pick, I'm not going to do it, right? Like Cousins is a better quarterback than that, but I am going to ask the Broncos what they think about quarterbacks. I'm going to ask Shanahan if Trey Lance really is the answer. Do you want a safety running your team, man? Didn't look like Jimmy was going to get it done. I know you love Kirk Cousins. Why don't you have him teach Trey Lance how to play quarterback? I'll talk to a bunch of organizations, see if I can get a first-round pick out of it.
He's got a great rapport with the tight ends.
Right, yeah, no, exactly. You get it. So yeah, I would attempt to trade Cousins would be my one move, but like my primary actual move would be to hire a different guy to do it, and my other move is to put myself in the Vikings Ring of Honor.
Yeah. Lurking asks, offensive head coach with good defensive coordinator or defensive head coach with good offensive coordinator?
So like my primary answer is who cares? Just get a good coach and the rest will figure itself out. But like that's punting on the question. If I get two equally good candidates and one is a good defensive head coach and we'll find a good offensive coordinator or vice versa, I'm going to pick the offensive guy because offense is more stable from year to year. And if you get a good offensive coordinator, they might be hired to become a head coach somewhere if they succeed. That's what happened with Stefanski, what happened with Shermer. And they were essentially preparing for that with DiFilippo, but it turns out he was not a good offensive coordinator in the first place. So, it didn't matter. So yeah, I would prefer the offensive guy because offenses show up in the playoffs much more than defenses in terms of getting to the playoffs. Offenses tend to win more often, even in the playoffs, than defenses. And it's just more stable of an investment from year to year. Offenses stick around, defenses tend to not. And one reason for that, of course, is that because people lose defensive coordinators, so it's not really fair because it doesn't apply to this scenario. But offenses seem to have a greater control on the outcomes of games. And so I'd prefer that to be the more stable part of our organization. But honestly, if if there's only going to be one head coach in a cycle, and sometimes there is only one good head coach in a cycle, get that guy, whether or not, he was the equipment manager at his previous job or a special teams coordinator or a high school coach. Like, I don't care what their background is, because if they're good at running an organization as a coach, that's who I want. And you're not going to find a lot of situations where a hiring cycle has 2 or 3 head coaches that you can be picky about it. And so if you're leaning one way or the other, go with that instead of attempting to find a way to get into offenses or defenses or whatever. So that's my answer. But if I get to pick, it's going to be having the stable offensive mind.
Kyle Segal put some pants on and messaged us here. I'm just going to assume pants now.
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't know, man. It's saying a lot to presume that Kyle Segal is anything but naked.
Also true. Kyle Segal asks, where does Zimmer land as a defensive coordinator, and how many times is that team going to absolutely suffocate us to death on the field?
I think he might get head coaching steam. Maybe not this year. Maybe he sits the year out. But I think he might. Like, it's not quite an Andy Reid situation where it's like, yeah, Andy Reid's a great offensive mind, but he's not going to be an offensive coordinator somewhere. He's going to be a head coach. It's not quite that, but like...
Is it going to be like McCarthy going to PFF once?
Once.
Like maybe hanging out in the parking...
took a tour of the offenses, right? Yeah.
Like hanging out in the parking lot for an hour while eating chicken wings, and then coming back out and saying, I have gone to PFF. I now understand analytics. Hire me, Cowboys.
That was so... Especially that he admitted
the fact that it worked.
Yeah, I cannot believe that. There's an analogy I would use here, but unfortunately it's a political one, so I'm going to avoid it for now. But if anyone has seen Kamala Harris's interview with Stephen Colbert, I think you know what I'm talking about. The fact that Mike McCarthy admitted that it was just to get a job. That's not real. What we say isn't real. That's just wild to me. Like,
in this economy, you gotta put it on them if they're going to check whether or not you've got a degree. Like, come on.
Right. Well, yeah, but the thing is, I wouldn't do that with my boss sitting next to me, right? Like, if my boss is making a choice between being emasculated on the spot or firing me, I'm not going to leave it up to them to make that choice. I'm going to keep the lie up, right? Like, that's the thing. I don't think McCarthy is necessarily wrong for lying. I mean, he probably is. But I think that he is bold to reveal the lie as soon as he felt safe. That's quiet. That's crazy. So there's that. But what was the even original question here? Where are we? What are we doing?
The question was, where does Zimmer land as a defensive coordinator?
Yeah. So I think that Zimmer may not land anywhere this year, but I think he lands as a head coach because it's not like Vic Fangio. Like, Vic Fangio was like, what, 350 or something like that as a head coach? Mike Zimmer was like 550 as a head coach. Like, he has a winning record. The Jaguars would kill for a guy that never got below 7 wins. Kill. Like, you don't have to finish with that guy. But if you can build your organization up to be that way, and then find like your offensive ingenue, you can be like, hey, Mike Zimmer, it's great. You brought us to 10 wins in a 17-game season. Trevor Lawrence is an elite quarterback. Now we're going to actually use the quarterback, and we're going to stop running Travis Etienne and James Robinson into each other. So I appreciate the 4 years you've had here, and I appreciate you as taking to the playoffs once. But we're good now. We're going to get a good coach now. So, like, I think he lands as a head coach somewhere, maybe to an organization that needs stability. So I don't know that he'll land as a defensive coordinator. To answer the second part of the question, yeah, he's going to suffocate the Vikings defense or the Vikings offense for ages to come, so long as he is in the league. They'll find ways to play him.
A hilarious number of times. I would think that if he doesn't end up getting a head coaching job this year, like, for whatever reason, I can just see him.
He could take the year off, yeah.
Yeah, I could see him potentially going down to Vegas for that. I think that would be an interesting team. Mm-hmm. But I could also see him taking a year off and then picking up the mess that Joe Judge leaves.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah.
And doing that. And is Parcells going to tell you not to take the Giants job?
Right, exactly.
Perfect. Yeah. Let's go to Kyle Slaby, who asks, Brian Flores, great coach with reported interest in Watson. Assuming he wanted the job, would you be in favor of him as the next coach? And if he said a Watson trade was a requirement for his employment, would that take him off the list for you?
Um, to answer the second question, absolutely, it would take him off the list, no question. Um, the first part is interesting because it's easy. I already forgot that element of the equation, so thank you for bringing it up. And it might recast my kind of opinion on Brian Flores because I don't want that kind of guy. Like that's the thing. Like, and I just said, he shouldn't have been fired or whatever. But I'll walk that back if you remind me of the Watson stuff, and that's fair. I don't want that kind of guy. So if no, thinking about the Watson situation and saying, hey, he's a pretty good coach. Like we know he's not proven to be a great coach, right? Like he did a good job with the Dolphins, but that's where we're at. Like we think that the Dolphins are bad and he did a pretty good job getting them to winning seasons, but he didn't like get them to the playoffs, right? So like it seems like he's a good coach. I don't know that we have anything more than that. Um, I I think that you just don't want that kind of guy. A, because it's like morally reprehensible, but B, there is something to be said about like doing such a poor job of managing your relationship with the general manager and the players that you can put back to back winning seasons together on like a garbage roster and be fired. Like there is something to say about that. Maybe he'll have learned his lesson about that. Maybe he'll reevaluate his approach to relationships or something. And maybe again, people. There's a lot of coaches that succeeded once they got their second head coaching job instead of their first. So that's entirely possible. But like that kind of wiring is not something I want.
Let's go over to Kyle Slaby again, who asks, reckless speculation. Was Rick red weddinged by someone in the building, or do we think he self-destructed his own promotion with poor management of an ornery coach?
Ornery?
Listen, my mom's Norwegian. That's the way I've always heard it.
Okay.
I can only apologize for my family so much. Boy, that's
Gottmik 2022.
That is that is the title of my autobiography. I apologize
for my family only.
I can only apologize for my family so much. Like I heard my Norwegian grandma Olga used to say it like that, so like I can't. I've got credibility.
Yeah, I know.
There.
Yeah. All right. So we talked about this earlier in the episode. It is reckless speculation. None of this is well sourced or reported. People who do a better job of developing sources will probably, although we don't know for sure, do a better job of investigating this question. So, knowing that it is reckless speculation, I will say that it is my assumption that Zimmer brought people down with him. I guess is my approach to this question. It seems like that. So I don't know that that Spielman got red weddinged, because I think that they wouldn't have kept the rest of the football operation staff or the rest of the coaching staff. Although keeping the rest of the coaching staff is entirely so that the next coach that comes in gets to choose whether or not he wants to keep that staff. So keeping them on contract so that the next coach can make a decision is the choice here. But I think if you're burning it all down, you're burning it all down, and it's just Spielman who's gone. So in addition to Zimmer, so I don't think that's it. But I feel like something may have happened with Zimmer vis-a-vis Spielman and that potential pseudo promotion.
Beef Brewski asks, for Reefs, I'm too embarrassed to ask this question corner. What exactly does a head coach do? I have a general sense, but during the week, what does their workload look like? What is that? And does that vary from team to team?
Like the weekly workload during the season. So this is I'm not going to say complicated question, but it's just a very detailed answer. So what I'll say is that the head coach, I think before the season starts, sets the framework for what the organization is going to look like, both from a day-to-day scheduling outlook and also from a, what departments are doing outlook. So a coach will have to check in with the like nutrition department and make sure the nutrition staff and make sure that the approach to how they feed the players is what they want it to look like. And so they'll meet with them before the season. They'll make sure that they meet with the football operations staff and make sure that scouts have meetings with the coaches to make sure that the scouts know what they're looking for the player types that the coaches want. The coach will organize those kinds of meetings and lead those meetings. The coach will hold roundtables in the off season to determine areas like pain points where the organization is weakest and work with the general manager to make sure that they acquire those players. They will run scenario through scenario through scenario. Like, if this player goes down, what do we do? If this player goes down, what do we do? If this player goes down, we don't have an answer, so we better do something about that. And that's just kind of in the off season. Of course, they'll be setting all of the practice schedules, the training schedules, and so on. And so they'll make sure that in OTAs and spring in training camp and stuff like that, they know what they're going to do that morning, that afternoon, that evening. They'll make sure that the way that they want that team to look, whether or not they're heavily involved in like defensive or offensive game planning, or they're more hands off, fits the style that they have coached, right? That they want. And so they'll check in and do meetings constantly with the rest of the coaches to make sure that the coaching points that they want emphasized are emphasized. They'll go over the film every Monday to make sure that that's what's happening and identify areas where the position coaches and the coordinators need to do emphasis in terms of coaching throughout the offseason and throughout the week. They'll lead all of the game planning meetings. They'll go over all of the game planning meetings. They'll double check the work of their quality control assistants to make sure that all of the film work that all these grunt work people do aligns with what they need them to do, and also that they're accurate, right? One thing that Bill Belichick is kind of famous for is when he hires, and so some coaches actually don't hire quality control coaches. They actually make the position coaches do all that work so that they've got a better understanding of what the game plan is going to look like. But one of the things that Bill Belichick used to do is when he got a quality control coach, he would essentially shadow the job. And so he would do the quality control work that the quality control coach was doing. And then when the quality control coach turned in his work, he would compare notes between what he did, what the quality control coach did, and then he would basically grade it like it was an essay and give it back to them and say, hey, you should have done this. You should have done this. You got this wrong. You got this wrong. This is what I want this to look like. And they'll get all of the notes and the statistics that those quality control coaches guys will get, and they'll incorporate that into their game plan. It's so much. It's so much in terms of the way they set up the schedule, the amount of film that they watch, the way that they want those coaches to run those practices and stuff like that. And they'll hold meeting after meeting after meeting to make sure that the stuff that they do during practices is completely on point and that's scheduled well. So that's why Kirk Cousins said the coaches put in more hours than the players do, because that's true. Terrence Newman actually retired from coaching because of that reality, because players do a ton of work, right? They do a ton of work. And then Terrence Newman, who's very used to this, goes into coaching and is like, yeah, it was way too much work day to day. I am rich. I don't need to do this. There is a ton of film watching. There's a bunch of organizational stuff. You end up on a spreadsheet a ton because there's only so much time with the actual players to work out techniques and practice. And you'll go over practice film a lot to make sure that the way practices are being run, the way you want them to run. And that's during the week. I think that this question was about during the week and not on game day, because on game day, that's a little bit more evident that they're kind of managing the game. They're constantly having conversations with the offensive and defensive coordinators if they're not the ones calling the plays. They're keeping track of snap counts on a general basis. They're keeping track of the adjustments that need to be made. They're keeping track of pain points and stuff like that during the game. Obviously, they have to do game management stuff like call the right timeouts, do the right challenges and stuff like that. But making sure all of the operations are working, making sure that the collaboration is clean between all of the various aspects of the operation, that's what a head coach does. It is remarkably hard.
Next question is from Brian Jellerson, who asks, do you think letting both Zim and Rick go could signal that ownership is considering hiring a coach that could take over both GM responsibilities and coach, a la like a Bill Belichick?
No, and I think Brian submitted this question in before we had the Wilf presser, so fair enough. But for people who did not hear the presser, it very much looks like that they will hire a general manager first, and that the general manager will lead the search for a coach.
Next question is from Joe Justice, who asks, if the Vikings plan on starting over at quarterback, will it be possible to get a quality player at pick 12? Or are there no quality quarterbacks in this draft class? Also, when is the clip show coming out? I'll answer that part first. I'm hoping for Thursday. I am hoping for Thursday. If not this weekend, but I am hoping for Thursday. Both shows should be out.
Merry Christmas.
Yes, in middle of January.
Yeah. It's the best time for Christmas.
And next year I'm starting in November. This year there's so much material. And I was going through it and just like, oh my God, how do people listen to this show? Oh, wait, let me not say this aloud on my podcast. But like, there was just a lot of
people listen to this show.
There's just a lot of. I wasn't meaning quality. I was just meaning quantity as far as the Patreon stuff. I was going through bonus stuff and all that. So I think on the bonus stuff, I'm finally through. I think I'm at the point where we start doing the Aaron Rodgers stuff. So I get to that.
Oh, we're pretty close then.
Yeah,
okay.
So we're getting there.
So in terms of quarterbacks, I don't know how many of these guys have like first round grades from teams and stuff like that, obviously. And I don't even know how many of them have first round grades from draft experts yet, because I haven't started the work of compiling that. But the quarterbacks that seem to be at the top of a bunch of lists, the top 6 are, I don't even know how to pronounce these guys' names yet. So like, bear with me. But Matt Corral at Ole Miss, Kenny Pickett at Pitt, Sam Howell at North Carolina, Desmond Ridder at Cincinnati, Malik Willis at Liberty, and maybe Carson Strong at Nevada. Like that guy could maybe be a potential first round pick. I doubt it though. But that's kind of where we're at. None of those guys feel like number 1 or number 2 pick overall material based off of the conversations that a bunch of people who do this for a living have said, whether it's because of the sources that they've contacted within NFL organizations that are scouting right now, or because of their own evaluation as draft analysts. It feels like we do not have the type of quarterback that can compete with, not just the Andrew Lucks and the Trevor Lawrences, but like as prospects, like Justin Fields, right? Or I guess Trey Lance and Carson Wentz, or Jared Goff or Josh Rosen. Like those guys were, from a scouting perspective, worth the investment in the top 3 for a quarterback. And it feels like none of these guys are. So yeah, there's probably going to be a quarterback that will go in the first round that'll be available when the Vikings pick. I don't know that I would tie myself as an organization to that guy. Again, if I'm running an organization, I'm going to have much more direct feedback from scouts that I trust. And so if they're like, hey, Malik Willis is it. He might only be 6 feet tall. He might be, shorter for a quarterback. He might be rough as a passer, but this dude is like a rare special talent. So this guy's it. Yeah, I would pick him. But right now, it doesn't seem like, we've got that. So I think a quarterback will be available. I think that there's going to be quarterbacks to go after that pick in the first round. I don't know that the Vikings should do that, should invest in that.
Jack Rackham asks, not the sexy pick necessarily, but has Joseph earned the right to be the presumptive starter heading into the 2022 season? Would you be comfortable if that were the case? I'm presuming you're speaking of Greg Joseph here.
Yeah. Honestly, yeah. Somebody I was very hesitant about has made, I want to say, first of all, every kick but one since the beginning of the month, so the month of or the beginning of December. So he missed like one kick against Pittsburgh. It was an extra point, which I think ended up mattering to math that Pittsburgh had to do, if I want to remember correctly. No, he did also miss a field goal against Pittsburgh. But yeah, for the most part, I would say that despite a pretty rocky camp and honestly a pretty rocky preseason, having a extremely high proportion of his kicks come from 50 plus and still hit over 85% of his field goals. And then, like 90% of his extra points. That's good, honestly, which, I wouldn't have expected based off of what I was seeing in camp and what I was seeing in the preseason and stuff like that. He had a really high proportion of his kicks come from 50% and or from 50 plus. And he is above halfway in terms of accuracy percentage, which by itself is a bad stat. But once you account for the number of 50-plus yard field goals, 40-plus, once you account for depth of kick, does maybe a bit of a better job, right? So like one good example is the Buffalo kicker Tyler Bass has a higher percentage of kicks made, but like at 87%. But he had 15 kicks come inside the 29-yard line, right? Greg Joseph had 8. Um, so yeah, that's somebody that is a worse kicker than Greg Joseph, but has a higher accuracy percentage. And I think once you account for the depth of kick and the difficulty of kicks that he had, he kind of rises up the charts. I don't think that he's a top 10 kicker or anything like that, or performed like a top 10 kicker, I should say. But I think that yeah, he's earned the Vikings' ability to not think about the position, which I think for a kicker is the highest praise you can give.
Let's go to Luke Braun, who asks, fictional or not, which person could lead the Vikings head coach and GM search that would make for the funniest summer comedy flick?
Oh, boy. Bill Murray?
Bill Murray would be good, especially with his ties to Chicago. That would that would be entertaining. You know what movie I saw the other not yesterday, but the day before? I was flipping channels and I hadn't seen Slapshot in years.
Yeah. Oh.
And Paul Newman,
right,
would be fantastic in that.
Yeah, kind of like a bump. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I get it.
I'd be totally down for that. That'd be entertaining as hell.
Mr. Bean.
The not talking thing would be perfect. Actually.
Yeah, exactly. Mr. Bean would be great. Like attempting to get across an insanely convoluted idea to the Wilfs without talking. Yeah, perfect.
Yep, absolutely. Also from Luke Braun, who is the strongest current Viking, player, staff, anyone, that Chris Thomason could beat in a no-rules street fight?
All right, so Luke Braun's contention, and I think it's fair, is that you don't want to get into a fight with Chris Thomason. I think that makes sense, honestly. I think that there's something there that you don't want to awaken. So, plus, by the way, the last international trip he took was to learn about Mongolian wrestling. So I'm just put that out there. That's a true fact about Chris Thomason.
That's a fantastic fact about Chris Thomason. Chris Thomason is an instantly way more interesting a person.
Oh, his off-season travels are incredible. It's one of the great tragedies, non-death related, of COVID that we don't get more international travel stories from Chris Thomason. Because I think the next trip that he took in the off-season, that was going to be an international trip, instead he went to the Spam Museum in Austin, Minnesota with Matthew Collar, which ask Collar about it. It sounds like that was wild anyway. So like
you mentioned that aloud and people are going to donate to the Patreon saying, so when's the next road trip episode, James? I'm taking a reef to go see Spam, even though I've never had some. It'll be great.
Okay, the trip wasn't interesting because the Spam. It was interesting because of Thomason. I want to make that clear that Matthew Collar had a wild time, not because of the Spam part of the Spam Museum. So yeah, I think that Thomason could win some fights that you would not have expected a person of his stature to win. So there's that. I'll put that out there. I would say, like, there's like a range here, right? Because I think Michael Pierce is at the top. Someone answered Michael Pierce, which is great. Michael Pierce is probably at the top here, and at the bottom is probably Greg Joseph, right? Oh, I guess we could go to staff, right? In which case, I don't know, Clint Kubiak. Who knows? Someone mentioned the equipment manager. What's his name? Dustin Ryan or something like that. Fair. But that's kind of the range. And I think you're well above like Greg Joseph at this point. I think you're like I think he washes Cam Dantzler is the thing. Yeah. Again, no holds barred. Like, I think as soon as you put a rule in the fight, Thomason's done. If you're like, hey, nothing below the belt, he has to start thinking, and that's when he's out. So I think that he gets past the entire secondary, maybe not Harrison Smith. but I think that he gets
No,
past the secondary.
Harrison Smith is the guy who breaks a bottle over his head before he comes in to fight you.
Right. Yeah, and that's the concern there. Is that if Thomason is fighting wild, right? And you never want to fight against somebody who's fighting wild. Harrison is like a Homer Simpson who can punch back. Like you don't want a guy that's going to absorb all your wild damage. You're done, right? So I think you're out at Harrison Smith. So maybe of the secondary, I think Thomason takes on Patrick Peterson, who I imagine is the next strongest on this list, right? Out of the secondary. I don't think Thomason takes on a healthy Anthony Barr, but I do think he cleans the floor with Troy Dye, right? Like I think we're somewhere there. So I think I don't think he's got any of the defensive linemen. Not after Kenny Willekes' sack. I'm going to say even Kenny Willekes has it. But if Kenny Willekes didn't have that sack against Andy Dalton, I probably would have entertained Kenny Willekes. So I'm going to go with Chaz Surratt.
Let's just the more you learn about Thomason, I guess. Let's go
Wild.
Let's go to Arif's neglected resistance bands, who asks, will Arif follow the Vikings' lead and fire his obviously useless free weights and go with a more versatile and flexible training method? Ricardo asks, I was wondering if I could ask a small favor. He actually sent this in late last night. If y'all have a year-end press conference Zoom call with Cousins, could you whisper in your spookiest voice, 2 high safeties? I'm just wondering if he would run screaming from the room or if it'd be more of a blood draining from his face, silent type of panic.
I would get strange looks in the press room. I'm not going to do that. But if he'd heard that disembodied voice in a dark room, does he run or does he freeze? I think he freezes. I think it's a blood drains from his face sort of situation.
Yeah, if you have to question whether or not he runs or if he freezes, we have learned more often than not that Cousins freezes in the type of this sort of panic.
Exactly, yeah.
Either that or he's going to find a way to slide and go head first. Let's go to Elliot Slade, who asks, what is the most Vikings outcome that occurs as a result of firing Zimmer? Zimmer goes to the Broncos and coaches them to a Super Bowl win over the Vikings, or the Packers fire their defensive coordinator, hire Zimmer, give Green Bay a top 5 defense to go with the offense.
Oh, man. The more Viking scenario is the Packers one. But the more likely scenario to Vikings it up, I think, is the Broncos one. I think that answers the question.
Next question is going to be from Professor Poop, who asks, I just enjoyed the absolute heck out of this season. What is the crappiest but most realistic offseason you could dream up for me? It's going to be hard to follow up on this season, one of the best I've ever seen.
Yeah, I think the Vikings hire their 4th candidate at GM and their 6th candidate at coach. I think that guy is going to be kind of a stuck in his ways, no nonsense, very similar to Zimmer, but without kind of the revolutionary defense that Zimmer brought with him. I think it's going to be a guy that you always have to question if the rumors about players not buying into him are true. I don't know if any of these coaches are on that list, by the way. I'm just envisioning a guy. I'm sure that guy exists and he's being interviewed, but and the thing is, you could very easily be wrong about this. I thought Zach Taylor was basically that guy, except for the last part about players questioning him, because I don't think we even got to that point where there were rumors about Zach Taylor, because he was just a quarterback's coach. It wasn't even important enough to start these rumors. And I think Zach Taylor was the 5th option for Cincinnati, if I remember correctly. Anyway, he's got the last laugh. Go Zach Taylor. So again, who knows? But I think that, getting a coach like Zimmer, maybe an offensive version of Zimmer, maybe it's a run game coordinator or an offensive line coach, where it seems appealing based off of kind of all the football guy biases that we have, and he spins a good quote, and he's pretty entertaining to talk about and watching Hard Knocks and stuff like that. It's going to be that guy, but without how revolutionary tactical Zimmer was. And Zimmer's a super flexible defensive mind. We brought this up on the podcast before, but when his defenses started getting copied around the league, he just changed his defenses and did some other remarkable stuff. So I'll throw that in there. But I think it's going to be that guy, but without that. I think I'm describing Joe Judge. Oh my gosh.
Oh no.
Okay. I just described Joe Judge. So yeah, whoever the Joe Judge equivalent of this hiring cycle is, that.
And somehow it's not Joe Judge.
And somehow it's not. Yeah. And frankly, it is surprising that it is not Joe Judge. He is not available to be the avatar of this particular scenario. So there's that. And then the rest of the offseason goes with like, they trade Cousins for a 3rd round pick, but they take on his portions of his contract anyway. They draft a quarterback that nobody believes in for good reasons. And again, if it's like Zach Taylor drafts Josh Allen and Josh Allen develops in the way that he has, it very much looks like I'm right in season 1, right? Like Josh Allen is terrible, Zach Taylor's not doing anything, and it turns out both Zach Taylor and Josh Allen are great. So again, who knows what that ends up looking like? But at the beginning, it's going to be a quarterback that has kind of no bearing in terms of, he's going to be good, right? Like it won't even be any of the 6 quarterbacks I listed. It'll be the Kentucky quarterback, the guy who ate the mayonnaise coffee. That's the thing I know about him is mayonnaise coffee. So
that's actually his name. It's one of the rejected names from the Key and Peele sketch. Mayonnaise coffee.
It's like it's the Alabama corner. What's his name? Kool-Aid McKinstry or something like that. Sauce Gardner, the Cincinnati corner. Mayonnaise coffee, the Kentucky quarterback. These are all within the same realm.
Yeah.
2 of those names are real, by the way. So keep that in mind.
For the record, yeah.
Right. So yeah, they draft Mayonnaise Coffee in the 1st round. And
that just becomes his nickname.
Yeah, we're just going to call him that for a while now, huh? He has a name.
He's got a great rapport with Ham, too. He goes well with Ham. I don't get it. I don't care if that was low-hanging fruit. I'm still going for it, and I'm still
you kept going.
I'm still going.
I will say this. I have watched this guy quarterback a couple of games, and he like kind of rules, but only in the college football quarterback kind of way, and not in a way where you're like, yeah, that guy could play in the NFL. But he does kind of rule. So I will say that. Like in the same way that like when Matt Corral was a freshman, he got in for I think a single play against Miss State. And then I think he threw a touchdown, and then I think he started a fight with the entire Miss State football team, and then got ejected for unsportsmanlike conduct. Like, that rocks. I want that guy. Except I don't think he's a good enough. I mean, he is going to be a 1st-round quarterback. I don't think he's a good enough quarterback though. But like that's the kind of moxie you love to have in a quarterback, right? So that's kind of like the thing I'm getting out of Mayonnaise Coffee is that kind of moxie. But yeah, they draft that guy. He's likable, but you just don't see it. And you've got Joe Judge coaching him, and you only got a 3rd-round pick for Cousins, and you spend that 3rd-round pick on like a punter. So that's the offseason.
Be one hell of a punter. It'd be the mega leg out there.
Yeah, it's a regular Brian Anger.
Yeah. All right, let's go to TJ Sobish, the man who took 2nd in the Hell League this year. He says, more to blame for my crushing loss in the Hell League. ESPN/Yahoo making me believe that Sumaje Perine would get significant playing time, 0 touches, or Green Bay for pulling Davante Adams at halftime and letting a sun god reign over a field whose roof is designed to block out the actual sun.
It's funny because like sun god is the nickname of a receiver in the NFL, but Amon-Ra is named after the sun god, so like you can't really get around that. Sorry, Robbie Anderson. Amon-Ra St. Brown is the sun god now.
You're just going to have to deal with that.
You just have to deal with it. It's kind of like how Dwight Howard just took the Superman nickname. Like he just took it.
Yeah, like Shaq went, "No, I'm still in the league. What are you doing?"
You're right. And Dwight Howard's like, nah, I'm Superman. Everyone likes me and will respond to me as such. But yeah, I would say it is on. Well, first of all, it's fantasy football, so it's never your fault. It's on ESPN for convincing you that Samaje Perine was going to get significant touches. Although I don't blame them. That guy has an incredible sense of style, and by that I mean he's got a good beard and he shaved his head, which is good.
That's all Arif is really like looking for in style. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yep. That's all I know about style.
That is actually more accurate. Nolan Kaler asks, question for Arif's Democracy Corner. As you've no doubt seen, the Fighting Wine Towels, my team, not Nolan Kaler's, my team, defeated the Die Fliegen de Skillander. That's about as good as I'm going to get in pronouncing that. I originally wasn't going to do it.
Wait, did we have a Norse Code League entrant who named their team something actually Scandinavian?
Yes, Nolan did. Yes, in the Hell League.
That's so Nolan. I'm getting a sense of him from his questions now.
Originally, I just wasn't going to pronounce it, and then he literally provided me with a pronunciation guide.
Wow.
I was like, and it said, I know you'll want this.
He knew exactly what he was doing. Okay, yeah.
Die Fliegen de Skillander to claim bronze in the Hell League. While he could have leveraged his Machiavellian powers to claim first, he did not. Perhaps he was too distracted by the NDSU championship win. One might dismiss this as being a random fury of the kickers, but I have done my research and concluded that James finished third on purpose to make us think we all have a chance in hell. What is the best way to handle this deep state in the fantasy football hellscape? Do we march on Fargo in an insurrection-style fashion? Or do we wait for the coming storm to blow the winds of righteousness across James's Quickers next season?
Oh, wow. The Q references at the end of that question. Truly incredible. Wow. Well crafted, Nolan Kaler.
With a Q.
Did he spell any version of the word hell with one L?
No.
Oh, that would have brought it up to masterpiece. Okay, I don't know that there's actually a question in there. I think he just wanted to show off, which we gave it to you.
And he just wanted to point out that I took third. Or rather, Norse Code as a unit.
Yeah, we took third.
Took third in the Hell League. Also, DJ, it's my fault that this happened to you because I scheduled the fantasy playoffs to include the last week of the season.
That's the nature of the Hell League. That fits.
Well, yes, I'm saying as a result of that.
Okay, sorry, let me be clear. I am Satan in this scenario.
Before I talk about the Hell League, I'd like to remind everyone that I'm Satan.
Right. Cards on the table.
Let's just put that out there and call it good. Evan asks, is there a funnier trade destination for Kirk than Washington?
No,
that is absolutely it. Sean asks, for Arif's Eternal Damnation Corner, who is going to hell? Kubiak/Zim for refusing to give Jefferson a chance at Moss's record, or the Raiders for not choosing to just go for the tie?
Okay, this is very much a circle of hell thing, like Dante's Inferno style. Both those groups of people are going to hell for sure, no question about that. This is a very theological heavy podcast. We invest a lot of time into discussing the thorny matters that go into academic theology. So everyone knows that, right? And this is very much where we need to invoke the well established circles of hell theological backing that Dante Alighieri provided in Dante's Inferno. I think that the first circle of hell is like, and the further down you go is more punishment. It's like worse for you, right? The seventh circle of hell is worse. And so I think that the first circle of hell is the Zimmer Kubiak for the transgression of not letting Jefferson get to Randy Moss's record. But I think there's a more global impact by the Raiders. The Raiders let down the entire NFL community by not going for the tie.
Kneel for peace. I remember the tweet.
Right. So, and honestly, Daniel Carlson, with the eyes of history looking upon him, chose to execute that kick. He could have guaranteed a tie, very much. Um, Obviously, greater responsibility on the head coaches, the people in power, the people that have the ability to affect Daniel Carlson's contract. He's dealing with some systemic pressures, but he could have been a hero and he chose not to be. So for that, everybody involved in the decision, from the long snapper who chose to snap the ball well, the holder who chose to hold the ball well, to all the people protecting the kick, to all the people making the decisions in the Raiders organization that impacted their ability to make this kick, they're all relegated to the second worst level of hell. The worst level of hell, of course, goes to be racists.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Let's go to Don from Ohio to finish this up.
And NDSU fans. Sorry.
Well, okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Let's go to Don from Ohio. For a Reef's COVID corner, I have really struggled to sleep due to my coughing and congestion from COVID. Which Norse Code episodes will put me to sleep the fastest? There are so many to choose from, but which one of these snooze fests will do the trick?
Good. Gee, Don is not stopping COVID from letting him turn things into a bit. That's impressive. I was combining the word incredible and impressive. It is both of those things. Sorry you got COVID, Don. I hope you get better, but I can't help but respect your posting game throughout this process.
Which leads us to the second question. Which team had the bigger choke job to finish to clinch a playoff spot?
Good Lord, Don.
2021 Colts or 2003 Vikings? Yes, I know it's too soon.
Man. That's a good one. I think it's the Colts because it came to the final. Okay, but I think it's the Colts because you could have just run the ball. You have the best running back in the NFL right now. Just run the ball. And also, you chose this with Carson Wentz, so I think it's the Colts. But good question.
You lose the draft pick,
right?
They still go to the playoffs, and you don't.
Yeah. The Eagles are all over this one. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was just amazing. Monday mornings on the Pat McAfee show tend to be Overreaction Monday, which leads to a bunch of great flipping out. And his opening rant about his Colts missing the playoffs.
That's right, they're his Colts. I totally forgot that he played for the Colts.
Famously.
Yeah. It's his thing. His thing is that he played for the Colts, and I'm like, yeah, Pat McAfee, the guy who was a punter in the NFL for some unspecified team.
Yes, the man who holds all of the punting records for the Colts. The man who decleated runners when they'd be running back on him.
Yes.
And would famously tweet out the PED test thing that would be waiting for him the next day.
Yeah.
That was my first introduction to Pat McAfee, was the Twitter things the day after he would decleat somebody. It would be immediately the next day in his locker, you must submit to PED testing. Really? I had one good play and this is what you're doing for me? Be fantastic. So Pat McAfee went on this beautiful rant today about how he didn't even know that the Colts could possibly miss the playoffs.
He didn't know there was a scenario where because I think it wasn't discussed much because it required a Jacksonville win. But it required Jacksonville play in the game, right?
But the Colts are apparently snake bit in Jacksonville. This
yeah, that's right. That's
a thing.
Yeah, Jacksonville has nearly a 500 record or something against the Colts, where against everybody else that are awful, right? I think since 2018. Yeah, this is a thing.
Just amazing. But it was going through all of these tweets on the screen that the people had sent to him about how he didn't know, and one of them was the Draw Play Dave comic that he had put out yesterday, including putting Carson Wentz the Centaur to the glue machine.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a fun moment. And actually, I messaged him. I messaged Draw Play Dave after that and sent him a screenshot and told him that sometimes the grind is worth it. To which he replied, of course it was someone else posting my picture that makes it on. It was somebody saved it and put it up, but they didn't crop out the draw play portion. So at least there's that. But Before we end, the comments that Frank Reich made about his commitment to Carson Wentz. Do you want to take a moment here and have a victory lap?
Yeah, absolutely. So Frank Reich said about Carson Wentz, nothing. He didn't answer. He said he didn't want to evaluate players individually during a season-ending presser. Mike Wells clarifies, adding, Reich has consistently shied away from publicly criticizing his players. But when there is a reason to praise players or when there's a reason to commit to a player, he will do that. And so when he said, when they asked about Philip Rivers at the end of 2020, by the way, like, it was a good question, right? Like, are you going to commit to Philip Rivers as your starting quarterback? As I sit here right now, yes, I want Philip Rivers to be my starting quarterback next year. I think Philip still has a lot of good football left. Rec on January 10th, 2021. Wentz doesn't answer. If the Colts had only listened to me, a normally well-run operation, an excellent organization, rebounded from the Josh McDaniels scorning with style, right? Like on top of it, ended up adding a great coach, put together a great defense, bunch of good drafts, just missed on the quarterback. And the reason that they went for this quarterback is because NDSU quarterbacks are manipulative. It's not Frank Reich's fault. You can't trust NDSU players. You just can't. And I mean that morally as people. You can't trust the Vikings because they will do whatever it takes to win and then they won't. Except for, I guess, the vaccination thing. But the NDSU players, you just can't trust them morally, ethically.
Sometimes the vaccination thing falls into that too. But
sometimes that gets folded in. Yeah. But yeah, that's so Frank Reich got bamboozled by Carson Wentz. Happens to a lot of us, not to people who have experienced dealing with the NDSU football program like yours truly, but it happens to a lot of us. I understand. Now, if you had a general manager coach separation on this very important question of quarterback, you would have been able to avoid it, which is one reason you want to avoid it with the Vikings, so you don't get bamboozled by further NDSU players. Which, man, the Vikings should have a long talk about Ben Ellefson. Just going to put that out there. So, that's he's a snake. Can't trust him.
I was enjoying the tweets this weekend from people talking about the NDSU thing, and I was trying to envision a scenario where you really cared about an FCS team. Like, even traveling to go see an FCS team, like, going out of your way to go down to Frisco for a game. I just don't understand that type of fandom for an FCS team.
Yeah, it doesn't really make a ton of sense. I mean, it's an FCS team. The stakes are pretty low. Why would you go all the way to across the country to watch them play? I mean,
FBS. Now that I understand.
Right.
James Madison now as an FBS school.
Yeah, it's an FBS program.
Yeah.
As part of the Sun Belt. Yeah, for sure.
100%.
High stakes. Yeah.
Totally.
And on top of that, of good moral character.
Well, obviously.
But that's besides the point. That's an addition.
Well, that is going to be the end of this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have all enjoyed it. Again, we knew this was going to be a long one, but this is the last one for a little bit, so enjoy it. Arif, what do you have to plug?
Yeah, over at The Athletic, I've got a piece about how the Zimmer defense kind of just fell apart. It's going to be a little bit of a blow-by-blow. And then after that, it's going to be that Kirk Cousins piece. Maybe, finally? I don't know, man. But we'll be kind of reflexive and responding to updates in Vikings news as it may happen. So you can find over that at The Athletic, theathletic.com/author/Arif-Hassan, or you can follow me on Twitter at ArifHassanNFL.
And every year we give out our Norse Code prop bets as well, so be looking forward to that here in the next couple of weeks. So for Reef, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening, and please remember that the Vikings are not to be trusted. And we will be back soon. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of The Athletic, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed,
at NorseCodeDN, or my personal account at BigMono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
All things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.